Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the December 5th, 2017 meeting of the Downers Grove Village Council. It is my privilege to call this meeting to order. If you haven't already done so, there are copies of our agenda on either side of the room. Please feel free to pick up a copy. You can follow along with tonight's proceedings. There will be multiple opportunities for public comment, both with respect to items that are on our agenda tonight, as well as a segment that is reserved under item 5, which is designated for public comments of a general nature. At that point in time, if any members of the audience have any questions or comments of a general nature with respect to things that are not on tonight's agenda, at that point I'll invite you to please come up to the podium, tell us who you are, and we will welcome hearing from you at that juncture. But first, it is our proud tradition to begin our meetings by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. So I would like to ask everyone present to please rise and join us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you very much for joining us in that. And now I would like to ask our fine village clerk, April Holden, to please call the roll.
Commissioner Wallace?
Here.
Commissioner Earl?
Here.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Here.
Commissioner White?
Here.
Commissioner Jose?
Here.
Commissioner Barnett? Mayor Tully?
Here. Thank you very much. That brings us right to item 3, which pertains to minutes of prior council meetings. We have one set of minutes to approve tonight. Those are our council meeting minutes from our regular council meeting of November 21st, 2017. If there are no changes, corrections, comments, or concerns, I will entertain a motion to approve those minutes, please.
Mayor Tully, I move that this council approve the meeting minutes as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, those minutes are adopted. Thank you very much. That brings us to item 4. Tonight we have a periodic presentation that we received from the Economic Development Corporation of Downers Grove. And tonight, to present the quarterly Economic Development Corporation report for the village is the Supreme Executive Director of the Downers Grove Economic Development Corporation, Michael Casa. Good evening, Mr. Casa.
Good evening, Mayor Tully. Thank you. Mayor Tully and village commissioners. By the way, I have printed copies of the report if anybody would like that. I can pass those out if you'd like that, let me know. Here to present our report, and so Michael Casa, I'm the President and CEO of the Downers Grove Economic Development Corporation, located at 5159 Mokel in downtown Downers Grove. Let me start with some recent projects. And since the last month, Packy Webb opened their new spectacular dealership on Ogden Avenue, which I believe will serve as an anchor for redevelopment in the central part of Ogden. It's just quite a project that everyone worked so hard on. Vequity Real Estate broke ground in late November on their development, which they are calling Downers Grove Town Center. It's at the northwest corner of Ogden and Maine. And at the groundbreaking, and then in the press release that was sent out, they announced there are 6 tenants, which includes 4 fast casual national restaurants. Those are City Barbecue, Panda Express, Mod Pizza, and Core Life. Those are all national restaurants. So we look forward, they're under construction and expect to turn over the spaces to the tenants in early spring. Ashley Furniture opened their new Downers Grove store on November 22nd. Some of you may have visited the store in the last 2 weeks. Lincoln has submitted plans for their new dealership for the exterior renovation, and they're currently renovating the interior of their dealership at 216 Ogden. Outback Steakhouse is under construction for their new restaurant, which is located on the end cap next to Duluth Trading at Finley and Butterfield. Mission Barbecue, which is a national sit-down restaurant chain, currently under construction for their new restaurant, which replaces Ruby Tuesday in the far corner at Finley Square. I want to mention that a considerable amount of time is now being spent on opportunities for redevelopment for the Grove Shopping Center. I can tell you that we are working very closely with a number of developers, potential tenants, as well as the existing, some of the existing owners within the shopping center. Can't tell you much more than that, except that it's our highest priority right now because we do see a real opportunity, and I think some progress is being made. So we will hopefully have a good announcement on that opportunity in the not too distant future. United Healthcare completed the move to Downers Grove, a nearly 100,000 square foot regional office in the Corridors 2 building in Downers Grove. And then one that I was real pleased about, NEC, which is a national manufacturer of monitors and large screen displays. They moved their corporate headquarters to Downers Grove, leasing 50,000 square feet at 3250 Butterfield at Esplanade, and that got some regional and national news. Bridge development, which is on the agenda tonight, is another project we've worked closely on with the developer, of course, with the village staff. It's nearly 700 or over 700,000 square foot development, which again you'll be taking up later in the meeting. The last project I wanted to mention is Rexnord. Since in last couple of months, groundbreaking ceremony was held for this project, and I think what's particularly noteworthy about it is not only the scope of it and all that will bring, but a couple of other things that were an end result of that project. Number one is that they signed an agreement to bring all of their hotel overnight stays for their company to Downers Grove. It represents 1,000 room nights a year. The other thing that we got out of it that I thought was particularly helpful is just the amount of national news that this made. I mean, there were national business publications and regular media outlets that ran this story, both for the announcement and then since for the groundbreaking, which here happens to be a photo. It was a very nice ceremony. Thanks to all those that were there and for all those that helped and are continuing to help on that project. Let me talk about some sales tax numbers for the second quarter. So second quarter 2016, there you see the gross number for, this is for the home rule. It was a change of plus 2.5% over the same period in 16. The municipal tax for the second quarter, almost identical to the same period in 16. This is the municipal sales tax for our trade area, again, for the second quarter. You'll see that Downers Grove, for the first column, represents what the change was from 16 over 15 for the same period, and the second column represents the change in the second quarter of 2017 over the same period the year before. Again, you see that ours was basically break even. You'll see some of the other communities. These are the municipalities that were identified in the AECOM study as being in our trade area. And by being in our trade area, what that really means is these are the communities we compete with when a retail project is looking to serve these markets. So, for example, Naperville typically represents a different trade area. Unless it is a massive regional store, there will typically be a store potentially in this trade area as well as one in Naperville. By the way, one thing you might want to notice as you look at some of those numbers was that some of the communities we compete with, like Lombard, were up. Others, like Oak Brook and Bolingbrook, especially Oak Brook, which was down over 5%. Downers Grove sales tax from January 1st until August of 2017. You see the municipal sales tax numbers and the home rule sales tax numbers, and then the percentage change. We were down for 2.5% over the same period from a year ago, which would be January to the end of August, and the home rule sales tax was down a quarter point, or less than 1%. Then on the municipal sales tax for that period, January through August 2017 versus 16, I listed all of the cities, municipalities in our trade area for that same period. Again, January 1st through the end of August for 17 versus 16. Again, we were down 2.5%. There were some communities that were up, and there were others, again, like Oak Brook and Bolingbrook. Probably the two communities we compete with the most for projects. See, they were down, but there were others that were up, Westmont and Lombard. Also, from the state, we looked and pulled down the second quarter sales tax by category. The reason I put this one up, and I'm sure it's hard to read, is I just wanted you to identify which of those categories from which the village generates the most sales tax dollars. On the municipal tax, automotive and gas stations is first, drugs and miscellaneous, which covers a lot of categories, is second, and restaurants are third. Under total sales tax, restaurants are still third, but the other two are reversed. Drugs and miscellaneous are first, and automotive are second. So those are the ones that have the greatest impact on us when there's a change. As for the percentage change in each category, I just wanted to highlight a few. General merchandise, again, this is second quarter 2017 versus second quarter 2016. So it's a percentage change year over year, or a quarter over quarter. Under general merchandise, it was basically break even, just a notch under. Food, which was interesting, under the that's grocery primarily. Under the municipal tax, we were down 1.5%, up 10% under the home rule, and then the total sales tax for the two was down about a percentage point. Restaurants, about the same across the board, up 1.86% total. Apparel up about 6.5%. Furniture and appliances was up, but it was just under a percentage point. Lumber and building, hardware, home improvement type items were up almost 6%. Automotive and gas stations, again, a very important category for us. We were down 5% generally, especially in the municipal tax, down 5% over that same quarter of the previous year. Drugs and miscellaneous, the municipal tax was up considerably, but we were down on the home rule by almost 4%, and the overall was up just under 10%. And I typically don't look at the agriculture and manufacturing because it is wildly inconsistent as to what it means. One company can have a good quarter or a good month even, and it really affects that. But it's a small piece of the overall sales tax numbers. Okay, let me shift to economic development tools. I know the village has a priority action item which we're going to work heavily on, and that's to develop a coherent, proactive, and transparent approach to economic development tools, which are more important than ever. And I think the key word there is to be proactive, so that when a project presents itself, we're ready to go. In many cases, especially with tax increment financing, it is a lengthy process to qualify, to have that district qualified to be a TIF district, as well as then putting the implementation together. So if we can shorten that time frame, especially by identifying opportunities, as well as other tools in our toolbox, we'll be ahead of the game in terms of a project that's presented to us. We could talk up front with the developer or the business person about those tools. I want to talk about a few marketing items. That is a big piece of what we obviously do, is to tell the Downers Grove story. In September, we exhibited at the ICSC Deal-Making Show. That's the International Council of Shopping Centers. Virtually every national retailer, restaurant, commercial broker, commercial developer participates in this organization. This is the Chicago show. We have an exhibit there every year. Community Development Director Stan Popovich worked the booth with us on one of the 2 days, and we had an opportunity to meet with companies both on the show floor as well as in our booth. And then for the second year in a row, we held our broker's reception at Alter Brewing, which we call Deals are brewing in DG, and wanted to thank, there were several village officials there. I wanted to thank them for being there. Mayor Tully, Commissioner Earl, Commissioner White, Commissioner Wallace, Manager Fieldman, and Stan Popovich were all there. And if there was someone else that was there, I apologize for missing you. In fact, you can see some of those folks in the audience. It was another good event. We'll do it again next year. It's a great way for us to have our local business people and elected officials serve as ambassadors to talk up our community. And, you know, we do run advertising. We spend a considerable amount of time reaching out to the media, both in terms of paid advertising as well as earned media. And this latest issue of Northern Illinois Real Estate Magazine, there's 3 different places in this publication. This is the latest issue where Downers Grove is featured, including a photo and story on the Vequity groundbreaking. The other one that we were really pleased with, and I'm not sure if you had seen this, but we were one of 4 communities that were featured, and Cranes did an 8-page spread on economic development, and we were one of the 4 communities that was featured. It was sort of an interview format, but they covered a wide variety of issues, and of course, Cranes is not an inexpensive place to advertise. We did buy a quarter-page ad in that publication, but it was just great to get that kind of exposure. That was both the digital version as well as print. And then I just wanted to mention that next year, these are the 4 dates in which we'd like to do our reports to the council, and I have sent these dates on to Manager Fieldman. So March, June, September, and December. They're equally spread apart, and those will be the dates in which we will come before you with our report. And last, I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that Thursday night between 4:30 and 6:30, we're having our annual holiday open house at our office. All the staff and all the council members are more than welcome to attend. If you haven't registered, no problem. You can do it tomorrow. We hope you'll be there to help us enjoy the holidays. And that is my report, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Casa. I always appreciate the detailed and thorough presentation. Always a lot of good things going on. Any members of the council have any questions for Mr. Casa at this point in time?
That's a brief comment.
Please, Commissioner White.
Okay. I just want to say that I very much appreciate the focus and the reported data on our trade area. It's pretty common knowledge that retail sales in some ways are a bear market, that nationally, and you know that's a challenge. But as we're going to approve our budget later this evening, sales tax, both the municipal and the home rule, is such a significant portion that even facing a bear market, even facing strong headwinds on the local and national level, these types of efforts are more important than ever. And the only way to measure how we're doing is how we do in comparison to other communities in our trade area. So that's why I was very pleased to see that the numbers from the surrounding trade area there, because that's the objective metric of how well you're doing your job, which by all accounts you're doing very well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just, I guess one comment is that, you know, we're every economic developer in Illinois is in the same position that I'm in, which is how do you repurpose, redevelop, and release commercial space, and doing that in a what's in effect a shrinking tenant market. And battling the technology side of this is very difficult. I mean, I get inundated because I sign up for them for every retail newsletter there is, so I can stay ahead of the game. And this morning, I was greeted with this one. General Motors announced this morning that they're going to put in every new car starting in 2018 an e-commerce dashboard where you'll be able to make your purchases from your car while you're driving. And Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts were the first 2 that signed up. So when you go through the drive-through lane, you can actually order your donuts, your coffee, whatever, pay for it through e-commerce, and they'll be waiting for you when you get to the window. Actually, ExxonMobil and Shell have signed up. I don't understand how you're going to buy gasoline that way, but apparently they're going to try. So technology is really not our friend in this instance. That's why it's important that we stay ahead of the competition. When there is a deal to be made, a store to be landed, we got to be first in line, we got to land it. And we have to work closely with all the existing shopping center owners so that they know they've got a friend here at Village Hall and they got a friend in the EDC that's going to help them when they go out and they're trying to land a tenant or repurpose, redevelop their center. And it is really helpful to me that the village has identified in its comprehensive plan those shopping centers that need to be redeveloped, which ones are catalyst sites, which are not, and we use that that's our roadmap, is that comp plan. That's a big help to me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cassidy. Any other questions or comments from members of the council? Commissioner Waldeck.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the report. Excellent report. I wonder, and I'm not looking for this tonight, but it's Christmas, and everybody's got a wish list. So it would be nice to have a wish list from our EDC in time for Christmas. Not just far-flinging, ideas, we'd like to totally redevelop this or that, but maybe some of your real needs that we could do to help the EDC and with further success. So if you can do that by Christmas, that'd be appreciated.
Wait, if I could beg your indulgence.
You could probably do that right now.
Okay. If you can.
At our January exec meeting, that's one of the things we do is we kind of look ahead to the new year. So if I could have Christmas plus 30, that would be a big help to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions or comments from the council? Thank you very much for the report.
Thank you, and thank you again to the Village Council for your tremendous support, and thank you so much to the village staff for their great sense of teamwork. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks for all that you and your team do day in and day out to achieve some of these successes that you just described a few of them for the most recent quarter.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Very good. Well, now that Commissioner Barnett's here, we can move on to public comment. Wouldn't dream of having it without you. Good evening, Commissioner.
Good evening, Mayor.
Sorry you were delayed.
Apology.
No worries, it happens. That takes us to item 5 on our agenda, which is earlier advertised and described, is designated for public comments of a general nature. So at this juncture, if any members of the audience have any questions or comments of a general matter with respect to things not on tonight's agenda, I would invite you to please come down to the podium, tell us who you are, and we'd welcome hearing from you. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Council. My name is Jim Smalley, 246 56th Street. And I've been in front of the Council previously, as well as had discussions with village representatives and staff since 1994 in regards to flooding in our neighborhood. The area has experienced serious or significant flooding events in 85, 94, 96, 02, 04, 08, 09, 13, and recently October of 17. Residents continue to have to clean up their homes after these events, while the village continues its failure to manage and maintain the stormwater system in the neighborhood. These flooding events, when they occur in a serious or severe nature, also create a life safety issue within the subdivision. The drainage area that runs down 56th Street and behind the homes along Deer Path has not been managed in over 30 years. The silt and debris has built up 3 or 4 feet higher than it has been since we moved in. The erosion of the banks is terrible. There is broken concrete within the drainage ditch, as well as overgrowth that blocks the flow and the entryway from some of the pipes that feed into the drainage area. This and other issues have been raised to the village by a number of the residents, as well as myself. Following the flooding in 13, the village identified our area as a priority project. At this point, I'm not sure what the definition of priority is for the village, but it's definitely not the same as mine or Webster's. Following the last event in October, there were 2 examples that I was informed of that kind of stand out to what my impression of the village's lack of concern for the residents in the area. One, on October 14th, during that flooding event, a village truck was able to get into the subdivision, and there was a group of about 7 residents there, and they made a comment to the residents that, well, it's Westmont's water, in reference to the retention area that's to the south of our subdivision. I also then looked in the Suburban Life following that and saw a couple of quotes, one by Village Manager Fieldman and one by Commissioner White, that kind of struck me. And one was that Mr. Fieldman said that during November and December, we'll be reviewing ordinances to mitigate stormwater. Let me be clear. Ordinances will not correct this problem. Actions to manage and maintain the system will. Downers Grove is a waiver right community. In my discussions with the county, I've been informed that there are ordinances that the village needs to follow to keep that status. Again, this hasn't been done in our neighborhood. And this has caused the multiple events that we have experienced. Another comment was that Commissioner White had made that the village staff is going to come back with recommendations. Commissioner White, I just asked, what have they been doing since 2013? Also, ordinances were created that put burden on the residents who are already paying taxes and stormwater fees. Whenever they try to take action to protect their homes, it's usually costing them thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to do so. I think the bureaucracy is just insane. I know I used that term previously, and Village Manager Fieldman wasn't so keen on the bureaucracy term, but it's either that or it's a lack of leadership, it's a lack of management oversight, or there's individuals in positions that are not qualified to do the job. In my opinion, since the staff are not familiar with the issues that are impacting our area, maybe they could set up meetings with the residents to learn more about the problems that are going on. Through each of these events, we have not seen anybody come through the neighborhood during or just after the events that have taken place. If they set up some meetings, they can learn more about what's happening in the area and then work with the residents on a common sense approach for signs of improvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smalling. You're talking about the Deer Creek subdivision.
Yes, sir.
Of course. We're very familiar with it, and just for the record, Commissioner White was not on the council in 2013.
I understand that.
Sir, please.
But we got him in there.
No, I understand that. I was going to try to get you some answers to your questions, and I'd like to get you some information and stick to the facts and not make accusations. Can we get an update on what the efforts have been with respect to Deer Creek, which I know is from its soil content, its topography, and a number of things. Quite frankly, it should have never been built there in the first place, but it is what it is. And I know you recognize that. It's a very challenging area, including the fact that we don't have jurisdiction over the detention period to the east in Westmont, but have made efforts to do some intergovernmental relationships with Westmont, but I can't tell Westmont what to do, no less than they can tell us what to do. None of that is an excuse, sir. I fully recognize your issues, but what I think we would like, particularly because we have newer members of the council, is maybe an update on what has been identified to date as potential projects, what projects have been implemented, and what is in the foreseeable future. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I do recall that most of them are extremely expensive. And again, that's not an excuse, it's just an observation. But not lost sight of it or in any way, shape, or form has the Deer Creek subdivision fallen off the radar. So thank you for bringing it up. Understand that we had severe rain events, particularly in 2013 and again in 2017. It seems like the 100-year rains happen every other week these days. And there are some facilities that, no matter what they are, if you get more than 5 inches of rain within an hour, it's going to overwhelm even the best-built multi-million-dollar facility. And again, I'm not making any excuses, I'm just making an observation. In response to your inquiry, we'll all get an update from the entire council as to sort of what the recent history has been, what's going on now, and what should be happening in the near future, and be more than happy to sit down and go through that with you and any of the residents of the Deer Creek subdivision. Be happy to come out there and sit down with you myself.
I think that would be a good solution, Mr. Mayor. I think better communication with the residents of the area definitely would help. But I mean, back in after the 2013 event, we sent emails and we got a response saying that it's still a priority project, but it's 2020 to 2024. And at that point, I responded that there'll be 4 more flooding events before that time.
Right.
There's one last
Sure.
October.
For
Okay?
sure.
So this is something, the residents are getting really frustrated, as well as myself. Many of us have had to take extraordinary measures to correct the problems that our homes faced and have mitigated some of that stuff, but others have not. And so with no impact or nothing from the village that is being seen by the residents, that is a problem that they need to understand.
Right. No, I appreciate the frustration, believe me, because that has been an area of challenge for some time, as you very astutely pointed out, which is why I think a refresher as to what our options are, where they're at, and while 2020 may not sound like it's a priority project, we have, I believe, hundreds of millions of dollars of potential stormwater projects over the span of decades. And relatively speaking, you're at the top of the list. I realize that the 2020 and 2021 doesn't bring a lot of comfort to you, but there are a lot of other projects, a lot of other people that are way down the list. And again, one of the challenges that we have is it's not that that there's a indifference to the issues. Downers Grove has unique topography, a unique soil content, a lot of things that make it extremely challenging, including that a lot of infrastructure wasn't put into place when different things were built, and in order to install that infrastructure, I think somebody asked a question not too long ago about what would it cost to put in stormwater infrastructure throughout the entire village. I believe it's in excess of $200 million, which, as you might imagine, notwithstanding the positive economic development report that we saw on the screen, does not come anywhere near to generating that kind of revenue. And even if we had that kind of money, in order to do that kind of construction, it would take probably 10, 15, 20 years. But rather than, and I'm just saying that to put that in context, I'm very sympathetic to the long-running issues that your neighborhood has been facing in terms of flooding. And I'm also aware of some of the multi-jurisdictional challenges that exist in that area. And by the way, this is, again, no consolation to you, but there's some others over in Westmont and Clarendon Hills that I've become aware of recently where it's the same kind of thing. It's the water's over here and the detention facility's over here, and somebody is stuck in the middle. But let's, what I'm going to suggest is that we get an update from staff as to where things stand, and then I'd be perfectly happy to schedule a meeting with you and your neighbors, and we can go over it and see what we can do within the means that we have.
Right.
I have just a very brief comment, because I'm reasonably familiar with the capital project that's been proposed for your area. I believe actually I may have shown it to you in my office, what the capital project is. There's a list of about 8 or 10 or more. It's done. The problem simply is funding it. You know, so the capital project needed to solve Deer Creek, and I personally think it should be near the top of the list. I'm only one of 7. So there are $26 million, I think, in total projects that are that were identified in 2014. I shared the details of your project. Personally, I think that project should be near the top of the list. To my knowledge, very few of them have been funded. And it's a matter of issuing bonds. It's not a matter of bureaucracy. The paperwork's done. It's a matter of issuing bonds.
Well, and Commissioner White, the residents aren't seeing results, and people can't sell their homes. They're not getting the values. They're being required to do things that really they shouldn't have to do to protect their homes. And while the paperwork's done, it's the actions that need to be seen to get that done.
To spending the money.
I mean,
right.
You can walk down that creek. We did it previously.
Yes, we did.
And you look at the creek and the silt buildup and the erosion of the banks, and there's no capacity in that drainage ditch anymore, right? The overgrowth is blocking the flow. So when we do get 5 inches of rain in 24 hours, Mr. Mayor, it doesn't have any place to go. And so it's going to go through the homes.
Right. My point is that even if it was perfectly maintained, that volume of water would overwhelm it.
We've had some, in the earlier days, we had some heavy rains where it would fill up, but it wouldn't come over.
I understand.
But it's a combination of things.
Sure. No, understood. And again, I fully sympathize and empathize with your frustration. I'm well aware of for the last 15 years, the issues that area's been facing, and unfortunately, we've got a lot of places in Downers Grove, and we're not unique, but in some respects we are. I mean, frankly, there are homes that were built in places that shouldn't have been built in the first place if we knew then what we knew today. But we deal with it the best we can, and Commissioner White is right. A lot of it has to do with funding, and it's taking on new debt. There are various challenges. The only other thing I want to mention is Downers Grove is actually a handful of communities in DuPage County that has more restrictive ordinances when it comes to stormwater than the county of DuPage does. And frankly, tonight we're going to be talking about exploring becoming even more restrictive, and by some measures, depending on where we end up, could be the most restrictive in the entire county. Does that help you? Not necessarily, but what it's aimed to do is to see whether we can strike a balance about new construction or new projects, new expansions, including in neighborhoods like Deer Creek, that might help mitigate future taxing of the stormwater system.
And I think, Mr. Mayor, I think one of the things that also needs to be considered is, I think, since Deer Creek probably has a number of homes that were built when in an area that probably shouldn't have been built, then I think a common sense approach has to be looked at to do that, and not just the ordinances that have been developed or the rules that have been put in place.
Sure.
Because some of those things that homeowners are then tasked to do are quite expensive for them to take on as a whole.
Sure, understood and appreciated, and it is a combination of things. It's maintenance of existing systems, it's new capital investment, which costs money, and then maintaining those new capital investments, and then it's changing the rules about trying to mitigate the impact of future expansion, construction, additions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we really are trying to take a multi-pronged approach to it on a community-wide basis. But I'm fully aware and appreciative and empathetic with respect to the continuing issues that you and your neighbors face.
Okay, thank you.
So, thank you. Good to see you, Mr. Smalley. Other questions or comments from members of the audience of a general nature? All right, hearing none, we will move on to item number 6, which is tonight, relegated for public hearings. And we do have a public hearing with respect to the 2017 aggregate tax levy and abatements for the Village of Downers Grove. And I have some opening instructions with respect to this. I would like to call this public hearing to order. This public hearing has been called by the Village Council pursuant to the Illinois Truth in Taxation Law to consider the proposed 2017 tax levy of the Village of Downers Grove. Notice of this hearing was published in the Downers Grove Suburban Life, and a copy of the notice and proof of publication have been presented and are made a part of the official record of this hearing. I would like to summarize the procedures which we will follow for tonight's public hearing. First, I will ask the village manager, David Fieldman, to summarize the proposed 2017 tax levies. Next, I will ask if any members of the village council wish to make a statement or ask a question. Next, there will then be an opportunity for members of the public to make any statements or comments or to submit written statements or comments for the record. I will then ask once again if any members of the village council wish to make a statement or ask a question. And finally, thereafter, the hearing will be adjourned. At this hearing, please note that witnesses will not be sworn, and a verbatim written transcript of the statements or testimony given at the hearing will not be prepared. However, recording of the procedures will be made on village equipment and retained until the minutes of the hearing have been prepared and approved by the village council. So now that we all know how this is going to work, there will be a test afterwards. There are pencils and paper up on the side here. You can turn in the results of the test at the end. Just kidding. We'll now move forward with the public hearing as advertised. I will ask the village manager, David Fieldman, to please give us a summary of the proposed 2017 tax levies.
Will do, Mayor. As is our tradition, I will turn it over to Deputy Village Manager Mike Baker for the annual tax public hearing.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. I do have a brief presentation to provide an overview and explanation of the village's tax levy, and I'll walk through the figures that you see on the screen. The village's total levy, so all components of the levy combined, come to just over $27 million. From there, we remove the abatements, and the abatements really are portions of the levy for which the village has other sources of revenue identified and available, separate from property taxes, to pay for those portions of the levy. So they come out of that $27 million. The library levy was just over $5 million. And the library, as you know, is a component unit of the village, but managed and overseen by a separate governing body. The special service areas also only apply to very limited geographic areas. And when you deduct those three components, the village's 2017 levy is $13,350,000 approximately. In comparison to the 2016 levy, that number is about $553,000 more, and all of that increase is attributable to increases in the public safety pension levy portion of that village levy. The levy that the village has established for village operations has remained flat from 2016 to 2017, and that represents the 7th year that the operations portion of the levy has remained flat. Now, what this means for an average homeowner is that a property with a market value of $300,000 in 2017 will pay approximately $584 in property taxes to the village of Downers Grove. And as the visual indicates, that represents about 9.5% of the overall tax bill that the village makes up. So again, about 9.5%. That concludes my presentation. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. That brings us to the portion of the public hearing where I will ask if any member of the Village Council wishes to make a statement or ask a question. Statement or question from members of the Village Council. The only question I would have is you mentioned the library levy for 2017, and all of our property tax levies are done in arrears, which is why we are here in December talking about a levy for 2017. It's always the previous year. I'm very familiar with the levy for operations that the village has had for the last 7 years. As mentioned, it's been flat. The increases have been driven by the public safety pension contributions that we are obligated to make and fund pursuant to mandate from the state of Illinois. But if I could see the library levy for the prior 5 years, that would be great.
Sure.
Since we don't set that one. Any other questions from members of the council? Okay, you get one last chance. I will then ask if any members of the public wish to make any statements or comments, or if you've been furiously scribbling, submit any written statements or comments with respect to the proposed 2017 tax levy for the village of Downers Grove. Questions or comments? Okay, back to the village council. Last chance. Any questions or final questions or comments before we adjourn the public hearing? I will only add that once again I want to congratulate staff for the efforts that you've undertaken not only this year but in prior years that allow us to keep that levy, the village levy for operations, flat for 7 years. It's actually quite remarkable, and not to channel Commissioner Barnett for a minute, but certainly unsustainable. The fact that you've been able to do that for this long is nothing short of remarkable. So at any rate, appreciate the efforts above and beyond. With that, I will declare this public hearing on the 2017 proposed tax levy for the village of Downers Grove adjourned. All right, very good. That then brings us to item 7, which is our consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Martelli, I move that this council approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Are there questions or comments from any members of the public with respect to any items on tonight's consent agenda? Questions or comments from members of the village council? Hearing none, may I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Earl?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. The consent agenda passes unanimously. That brings us to item 8, which is our active agenda. We have 3 items on tonight's active agenda. First, item 8A. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance adopting the fiscal year 2018 budget in lieu of passage of an appropriation ordinance?
Martelli, I move that this council adopt the fiscal year 2018 budget in lieu of passage of an appropriation ordinance.
Second.
Any questions or comments on this item from members of the audience? Questions or comments from members of the Village Council? Commissioner Jose.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank everybody on staff who put in just a tremendous amount of work putting this budget together. I know how difficult a task it is, and I really do appreciate all the work. I also appreciate the council being willing to move some of the revenues around to get us closer to balance. I think we're certainly within shouting distance at this point. I think we're, about $5,000 or something in the budget, which is awful darn close. My problem with this budget is that it contains basically the cementing of a policy for the next couple of years that says that we're not going to replace the facilities on this campus that we know need to be replaced and unlock the economic development potential of much of this land. And I just simply can't support that. At this point, we're putting Band-Aids on top of Band-Aids when it comes to the police department and Village Hall. And it has to stop. And so I will be voting against this budget. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions or comments from members of the Village Council? A couple things from my perspective. Number one, I also appreciate staff identifying and my colleagues consenting to some adjustments in this budget to ensure that it is, once again, a budget that we are delivering to the residents of the Village of Downers Grove that is balanced. And I think that's important to do, and also a couple other things that we've identified for the future. The only thing I'll say with respect to Commissioner Jose's comments is it is a budget, and as with many things, budgets are, I don't want to say aspirational, but they are targets, and obviously you do a pretty good job of both meeting but exceeding them. But sometimes adjustments need to be made along the way to accommodate things, and quite frankly, here we are in December, but there's no reason why this council couldn't take up a facilities discussion in January or February or March or April. So I don't see this as cementing anything. Eventually, we're going to have to cement something called a foundation for a new building. That's just going to have to happen, but I don't see any reason why this council couldn't take up that topic at any point it chose to. So with that, I'll ask for a roll call, please.
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace? Aye. Commissioner Earl? Aye. Commissioner Jose?
Nay.
Commissioner Barnett?
Nay.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Item passes 5-2. That brings us to item 8B as in boy. Do I have a motion to adopt a resolution authorizing a third amendment to the sales tax rebate agreement with Downers Grove Imports Limited, doing business as Poogie of Chicagoland?
Mayor Tully, I move that this council authorize a third amendment to the sales tax rebate agreement with Downers Grove Imports Limited, doing business as Pookie of Chicagoland, as presented.
Second.
Any questions or comments from members of the audience? Questions or comments from members of the Village Council? Hearing none, can I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace? Aye. Commissioner Earl? Aye. Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, that matter passes unanimously and brings us to item 8C as in Charlie. Do I have a motion to adopt a resolution approving a final plat of subdivision for 3600 Lacey Road?
Mayor Tully, I move that this council approve a final plat of subdivision for 3600 Lacey Road, as presented.
Second.
Questions or comments from members of the audience? Questions or comments from members of the Village Council? Hearing none, may I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace? Aye. Commissioner Earl? Aye. Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, that matter also passes unanimously, and that brings us to the end of our active agenda. And on to item 9, which is our first reading or our workshop agenda. This is the portion of our meeting where items are presented for discussion only. It's a more informal portion of the meeting. Typically, we ask for a presentation of these items from staff. The Village Council will then ask questions of either staff or any petitioners, and then we'll open it up for public comments before coming back to the Village Council. No final action will be taken on any of these items this evening. As you may have noted, if you did pick up and are following along tonight, we have nothing less than a gajillion items on tonight's first reading workshop agenda. Although some of them, I suspect, we will combine in a future vote for expediency, but not just yet. So, as mentioned, I typically will ask village staff, beginning with Village Manager Jim Freeman, to present each of these items for consideration. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor Tully and Council. Thank you so much. As you noted, items F as in Frank to the end of the first reading will not be represented. They are the very same items that we just discussed during the public hearing. So they are on their to meet the publication requirements, we will not rediscuss those items. But Mr. Popovich, our CD director, will lead the discussion and provide background information on the first several items. Stan.
Good evening, Mr. Popovich.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, council members. Thank you, Manager Fieldman. The first item on the list tonight is a rezoning at 4340 Prince Street. The property is just south of Ogden Avenue there. I'll zoom in a little bit here. It's between Saratoga and Prince and just north of Sherman there. You can see the North High School soccer field immediately south of the proposed rezoning, and then the track a little bit to the southeast there. The township Downers Grove Township owns this property. There's 4 parcels on the left that are vacant, and then the township building and the parking lot on the east side of that property as well. The proposal is to rezone it from an R6 designation, which is multifamily, and a B2, which is a commercial zoning classification, to an institutional IMP1 zoning classification. As you may be aware, there's been development recently at this corner along Ogden and Prince with the new Starbucks, and then the Saratoga and Prince property was recently developed in the Chipotle and BMO Harris Bank, with the township selling off a parcel of land to facilitate a parking lot for the BMO Harris. So they are requesting a rezoning of their entire parcel to an IMP1, which is an institutional zoning classification, which is appropriate for a governmental agency. A comprehensive plan talks about cooperation, collaboration with other agencies. The property is adjacent to other institutional land uses, including 2 schools, and the future land use map includes a portion of the property being institutional in nature. Plan Commission found that the rezoning criteria were met. If there's any questions that you may have, I can answer those at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Popovich. Questions or comments from the council? Commissioner Barnett.
I just have one, and maybe really, excuse me, apologize. Maybe really, Mr. Tolman, it's for you, if you've got a minute.
Sure.
Welcome.
Commissioner.
Welcome.
Council.
The request makes perfect sense for the current use and really is kind of the exact type of thing we envisioned INPs for. My question just has to do with, I guess, saying one more time for the record that it's probably difficult to rezone back the other way. And so there's a limiting factor that I guess everybody should just be aware of as far as the usage of the property on Saratoga, likely. Nothing's ever permanent in stone. But going to INP and consolidating it probably limits, most likely, the future use of the parcels on Saratoga. So should the township decide to do something different, location-wise or even usage-wise, it may be a little bit of a constriction. I'm fine with it. I just wanted to mention that to you guys and give you a chance to react to that.
Yeah, as a former member of the first comprehensive plan ad hoc committee in 2010, 2011, and for a portion of the second revisit in 2015, 2016, and also as a plan commissioner, I was fully in support of, where appropriate, rezoning and if need be, consolidating to exactly what I have petitioned the village to do. The entire properties, the 4 R6 and the B2, are all located in a LPDA. So the possibility of redeveloping it to any significance past what it already is reasonably non-existent. So that's not really a concern of mine, or the township in general, and the Board of Trustees. So I was finally in a position where I could do something about it. I began the process in January, and in the blink of an eye, 11 months later, here I am. Any other questions?
Other questions of the council of Supervisor Tolman?
I'd like to thank Mr. Popovich and his staff for their patience and cooperation on the matter, and look forward to a positive approval next week. Thank you.
Well, welcome, and always good to see you, Supervisor Tolman. Thank you for being here. And just from my perspective, first of all, I think there is a good history of collaboration and cooperation between Downers Grove Village and Downers Grove Township. In particular, surrounding this property, there was an agreement not too long ago for part of it to be dedicated towards a development that now is there and is operating successfully, and that was in part because of cooperation between the village economic development and the township, so we appreciate that. The other comment, I would just reiterate what Commissioner Barnett says, that this parcel is exactly what we had in mind when the INP 1 and INP 2 zonings were created, so it's perfectly appropriate for it. I'm glad to see it happening. But third, the other reason why I think that, notwithstanding the LPDA location, is something, I don't know, makes me think that there might be a ready, willing, and able buyer in Community High School District 99 if that ever became available. So I don't think it's going to go fallow anytime soon. I think the high school would only be too happy to add that to his campus, should the township ever decide to relocate. Any other questions from members of the council? Any questions or comments from members of the audience? Final questions or comments? Thank you, and thank you for being here, Mr. Supervisor. You're welcome.
The next item on the agenda is a special use extension for 1401 through 1445 Ogden Avenue, better known as the Delta Sonic project. It's in between Sealy and Oakwood Avenues on the south side of Ogden Avenue. This is an existing picture of the property. You can see on the east side there's the auto body shop. The middle is the current car wash and the convenience store with a gas pump islands there, and then a former Burger King on the west side of the property. In September of 16, the Village Council approved a redevelopment. There's existing buildings in green, and then the new structures would be in purple. You can see the approval was to reduce curb cuts as well out onto Ogden, which is on the top of the screen there. A special use expires within a year if a permit is not granted or the use is established. In this case, the applicant's been working with us since the early part of the summer to get a permit, and it's just been a little bit of process as they're putting some detention underground, so that's created some unique challenges there to get some engineering done. So they've been working with us, just have not been able to get the permit through the finish line at this point, but we're confident they'll have the permit soon and start construction in the spring of 2018. And so they're asking for an extension for 6 months per the code.
That's a short extension. This is their first request for an extension.
Correct.
And we've had some projects historically that go 3 or 4 extensions.
We have talked...
Not many, but sometimes there is good reason for it.
We have spoken with Delta Sonic throughout this process and explained that this is a 6-month extension, and we want to get that permit issued within that 6-month period, so I do not have to come up before you guys.
I don't know why. We love seeing you.
I love being here.
Usually something's being built when you're here. That's either built or preserved, one of the two things. As we balance tradition and progress. Questions or comments? You missed the video, Commissioner Barnett. Questions or comments from members of the council? Any questions or comments from members of the audience? Seems pretty routine. Thank you.
You're welcome, Mayor. Move on to the next one. This is another new build one. The First Amendment to the Subdivision Improvement Agreement at McInerney Subdivision. You may remember McInerney Subdivision's on the west side of town at 61st and Plymouth. If we zoom in here a little bit, this is the current state of the subdivision. Subdivision was approved back in 2006 with a subdivision improvement agreement. The proposal is to amend it as the developer is going to start construction on the lots as well. If there's any questions about this, I can answer those for you at this time.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Questions, comments from the audience? Pretty painless.
So I've done 3 building ones. I'll do a couple of preserving ones now for you, Mayor. The next one's a historic landmark at 4632 Main Street. This property is near Main Street and Chicago, so just a little bit south of where we were just before the township and a little bit north of downtown where we are tonight. Property is the 4th house on the left here on the west side of Main Street. It is an excellent example of a craftsman bungalow. A bungalow typically is a low-pitched roof with cross gables. You can see the cross gable going from left to right in the picture here. Under gable brackets, which you can see sort of on the front gable there. And what's a little hard to see is there's some exposed roof rafters in the picture on the right there as well. The Village's 2013 Historic Building Survey noted that it's an excellent example of an excellent intact example of a bungalow. It noted about the wood clapboard siding, the brick columns there by the entry, and the brick fireplace, and the multi-panel casement windows surrounding the fireplace as well. Additionally, the house is a Harris Brothers kit home, so not a Sears home, but a Harris kit home. If it were to be landmarked, this would be the first kit home that was landmarked in the village, so that's pretty exciting in and of itself. It does meet both of these criteria in terms of it's 95 years old, and it has a good, excellent example of a craftsman bungalow. If there's any questions at this time, I can answer those for you as well.
Thank you. Questions or comments from members of the council? Any questions or comments from members of the audience or the petitioner? Good evening. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Brian Beechler, 4632 Main. I just want to say I appreciate the opportunity to have my home landmark. When we first purchased the home, I fell in love with the house, and over the years, I tried to do everything to maintain it to how it was originally. So, with the help of a neighbor, instead of replacing windows, I would strip the windows down to the bare wood and then repaint them and everything. So trying to maintain all that. We did put an addition off on the back, but also tried to maintain the integrity of the house to have it that historic character. So I really appreciate all the help everybody's gone to helping me with the landmarking process. It means a lot to see that other people appreciate the house as much as I do. I love Downers, and one of the reasons my wife and I love it is, you have a good mix. You have a lot of older homes, a lot of newer homes. It's just a good mix in the whole town, and I would like to see that, and it would kill me to ever see this house torn down. So that's why I'd like to maintain it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Beechler, for bringing this forward. Certainly, it's important to preserve the character and historic significance of structures in our community. As the new video that kicked off our meeting shows, we do very seriously try to preserve the balance between tradition and progress. We have plenty of progress, but also the tradition is just as important, and you're obviously a key role in bringing your home forward for voluntary landmarking. So we're as appreciative of you of doing that. You obviously take a great deal of pride in your home and have taken great care to be mindful of its historic significance. So we're very excited for you to bring it forward, and thank you for doing so. Not only will the community today enjoy it, but the community for many, many decades to come will as well.
Yes, thank you.
So our thanks to you and your wife.
Thanks.
Other questions or comments from members of the audience? Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening. Amy Gasson, 5320 Benton Avenue. I fully support the landmark designation for this home. It's really exciting, especially because it's listed as significant in the survey, and also because it's the first kid home, as Stan mentioned. And I just want to thank Mr. and Mrs. Beechler for bringing this forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Good evening. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Chuck Holtzen, 5226 Carpenter Street, and I'd also like to give my support for this landmark. I think that it's awesome that it's the first kid home and that it's a Harris Brothers house. So that's really awesome.
It's very cool. Thank you. Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening. Rich Calavani, 6825 Camden. I also stand in support of this landmark. It's exciting that this is a kid home. It was interesting. Mr. Beechler turned over a piece of the inside of the home, and it had a Sears label on it. We thought, oh, how cool, this is a Sears home, only to find out, well, a part of the home was from Sears. And then through further research, we came to find out that it was a Harris Brothers home, even more significant. And obviously, this being one of only 61 homes that's been identified as significant makes it even more special. So this is one of those gems. It's on Main Street, and it'd be great for future generations to see this retained. So I encourage you to landmark this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments from members of the audience? Well, all I can say is, given the fierce opposition, I think whether or not this gets approved is going to be pretty dicey, but I'm just kidding. Thank you for all the comments and for sharing your support. Next item, please.
Thank you, Mayor. The next one is historic landmark at 1324 Maple Avenue. 1324 Maple Avenue is just a little bit west of downtown on the north side of Maple Avenue. You can see the properties here outlined in yellow. The property is a house that was built in 1936 as part of a national architectural competition held by General Electric. It was a competition to showcase new innovations in home construction. This is a picture of the home soon after construction. It was to show about the modern design from the 1930s, provide the open layout for contemporary living, and was one of only 7 homes constructed within the competition held by General Electric. The home, so it's significant for that and part of the value it provided not just to the community but to the state and the nation as well. And then it also was home to Dr. William P. Jesse. Dr. Jesse was an eminent scientist at the University of Chicago. He worked on the Manhattan Project. He also worked at Argonne National Laboratory, which his big thing that he did, what he's famous for, is the Jesse effect, which is where he began making accurate measurements of W, which is the energy related to produce an ion pair. I am not a scientist. I don't remember anything from chemistry class, so we'll just go with that for the documents. Also, the home was built by Jacob Schless from J.T. Schless and Company. He built the Tivoli Theater. He built other commercial and community buildings throughout the Chicagoland area, as well as contributing to the 1933 Century of Progress, and then did some buildings for the 1939 New York's World's Fair. So basically, those 4 things, 1936 construction, and then B1, B2, and B4, ADRB and staff find that those criteria are met for a landmark status as well. I can answer any questions except for on the W, related to produce an ion pair. I'm going to fail that miserably, but the petitioners are here as well if you'd like to ask them any questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Any questions or comments from members of the council? Thank you. Any questions or comments from members of the audience or from the petitioners? Good evening again.
Good evening. Chuck Holtzen, 5226 Carpenter Street. And I got to meet David and Joan Kressel, who are the homeowners. And I was asked to help look into it. And what a journey this house took me on. It was a lot of fun. The House of Progress part was kind of an already known piece of that puzzle. But Dr. William Jesse and I have become really good friends. And although I don't understand any of what Stan was trying to talk about either, he, I think, is somebody that I would have really enjoyed getting to know. And Schless, there's a plaque I think you saw in your handout, your stuff you got, that is on the front of their house down below. You have to kind of look, but that's the Schless plaque, right? And it says that it was built for that. So it's an awesome home, and it's largely intact the way it was when it was built. They've just enclosed the porch on the one side, west side, where there was an awning type thing. But it was an awesome project to work on. So anyway, I support this for landmarking.
Thank you very much.
Myron Holtzen, 5226 Carpenter Street. I again support this for a couple reasons. One, I think this is the first time that we've looked at a house that had more of a national significance from the people who live there. I think all the other ones we've done here in Downers has always been more of a local significance, but with Dr. Jesse and also the builder as more a national perspective. And also having a degree in physics, I have to vote for anybody who deals with physics. So, thank you.
So can you comment then on the use of the Jesse effect with respect to tritium measurements? Just very curious about that. Read that paper about that in the British Journal Science. Good evening. Welcome.
I'm glad you're in such a great mood. Rich Calavani, 6825 Cadman. This is just so exciting and how interwoven this is. When I spoke before the ADRB, I used the metaphor of being a crossword puzzle and all the interconnections with the Century of Progress and GE being involved in that, and this being one of 7 homes across the country that won this contest. And him working for General Electric and also working for Argonne, and then being involved with the Manhattan Project and the development of the atomic bomb and the significance of that in our modern culture and how our current history and world history was shaped by that, and the fact that this was one of the segment leaders in running the metallurgy department of the Manhattan Project. So this guy was really significant in winning the war, a significant effort, and who shaped world history as a result of it. And the fact that this was the house of the future with all these electronic and electric devices, and the fact that it was tied to, the builder of this was tied to the Tivoli. and also the same builder tied to Fermi Labs, and and guys like Enrico Fermi hang around with guys like Albert Einstein and Robert Oppenheim and these famous names. So it's not just based on the coolness of a house and say, wow, that's a really fancy house, but just think of that as future generations drive by and say, I wonder who lived in that house and what's the significance of that person. So it gives us a good appreciation that we have enough foresight to have in our historic preservation ordinance that this kind of significance is important too. So obviously I stand and encourage you to support this landmark designation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I agree. Other questions or comments? Good evening. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good evening. Amy Gasson, 5320 Benton Avenue. Fully support this as well. Equally exciting. I think it's really interesting that this is, you may know, the youngest home to come forward to Landmark, because all the other ones have been 1920s and before, and this is 1930s. Despite that, it has, I think, such an interesting and so much history involved with it. So I just am really supportive of it and really excited about it, and want to thank the Kressels for bringing this application forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I likewise want to thank David and Joan Kressel for bringing this forward. Thank you very much. One of the words that I shared earlier with respect to the prior petitioner apply equally here. You've obviously have great pride in the home and have taken great care to maintain its significance. And these are really two cool examples of adding to sort of the dimension of the portfolio of the types of homes that are on our growing list of landmark properties in the village of Downers Grove. And we're going to have to keep updating that video earlier, because it just gets more and more interesting. So once again, thank you to both of you on behalf of the village for bringing it forward, not just for all of us, but for many future generations to come. Any other questions or comments from members of the council? All right, very good. Next item, please.
Items F is in Frank through V is in Victor, which is the balance of the first reading agenda, have previously been discussed as part of tonight's public hearing. So with that, unless there are any additional questions, that ends our first reading tonight.
Thank you. Just a couple of loose ends on that. Number one, I would be remiss if I didn't go through my typical discussion about how the amount that we levy is then abated, which means that we have to specify a certain amount of property taxes that we're levying for purposes of operating the village and other costs. But then because we have other forms of revenue that we can apply towards certain debt obligations that we have or bond issuances that we have, we're able to abate, or translation, not collect a certain portion of that. And I believe that the actual amount that we're levying after abatements is somewhere near $8 million less, or I'm probably close.
That's correct.
That. So while we have to, for purposes of procedure and compliance with state law, we have to levy a certain amount, what we actually collect is significantly less because of the abatements that we are also considering at the same time. The only other thing I'll point out is I obviously asked the question earlier about the library levy, because while we've been very good at being able to maintain our operational levy flat for 7 years, and while I wouldn't expect everyone to be able to do that, I'm very curious as to where the library stands in that respect, because it's no secret that one of the things I've been concerned about is a portion of the levy that we have no control over, yet we have to pass it and collect it. May not have been as flat historically as what we've been able to achieve, and that's something that's always been a very strong objective of mine. So I do want to see that, because I may have an issue with that, but we'll see. So with that, thank you for bringing us to the end of our first reading, our workshop agenda, and that brings us to item 10, which is the mayor's report. And as was mentioned earlier, on Monday at around noon, we, the Village of Downers Grove, joined in with municipalities and other local government organizations across the state in kicking off the year-long celebration of the state of Illinois' bicentennial, speaking of history. Next year, I believe on December 3rd, 2018, the state of Illinois will be 200 years old. But why wait till then? This last Monday, everybody kicked off a year-long celebration of what is being called Illinois 200. There were very special bicentennial flags that were distributed to all those who wanted to participate, and we held a ceremony here on Monday in which that flag was raised. So if you really want to go see it, it's out in front of this building on the flagpole just beneath the American flag, of course. We were treated by the Downers Grove Choral Society to a rendition of the state song, which was wonderful, and I was amazed how many people in the audience knew every single word. But so thank you for everyone who came out. Thank you for to the Downers Grove Choral Society, and I really appreciate staff organizing everything. I think it was a really nice event. We've gotten some good positive comments on it, and I think it was something that is important to join in and remind everyone of that hashtag Illinois Proud. Now, if we could only have Illinois Finance proud, that would be another story, but one step at a time. The other item I just want to mention is, as many of my colleagues know, I'm also the District 3 municipal representative to the DuPage County Stormwater Management Committee. I just want to share something cool with you today in terms of technology. The DuPage County Stormwater Management staff revealed a new series of animated maps that they have, and we had a conversation earlier today with a resident with respect to flooding. What they have done is through predictive flooding modeling, they now have, and we'll be rolling this out for use by municipalities and others, to be able to predict, sort of like where you can predict where weather and how it will affect different areas. This model can be used to affect, depending on estimated or predicted precipitation, where there will be flooding events and over what period of time. So, for example, in some parts of DuPage County, not here in Downers Grove, where there might be a road between, there might be a road leading to, say, a hospital that might be impacted by flooding. This tool will allow, based on the precipitation that's affected, for folks to know whether and when that road would likely be overflowed by a tributary or something running nearby it, so that they could announce in advance that the road was closed and that emergency vehicles and other people would have to take alternative routes to get to that facility. This may be of some use to us, so I just wanted to share that. It's not available to click through on a website yet, but it was demoed for the committee this morning, and that's just another tool that will be available to municipalities through the county. So I'm sure there's places where we wanted to know in advance how likely we might have to close a road or redirect traffic. This is a predictive tool based on a lot of really cool information, and it's animated, so you can actually see as the time of the precipitation grows how the flooding event is expected to impact the ability to traverse different roads and things like that. So anyway, something to look forward to. That's all I have under the mayor's report. We'll move to item 11, which is the attorney's report. Ms. Petrarca, good evening.
Good evening, Mayor. I have 19 items to present this evening.
Right, I'm going to go get a glass of water and come back.
Although it is my favorite meeting of the year, where I get to visually present my report as opposed to verbally. So on the screen behind me are 19 ordinances that will appear on next week's active agenda. The majority are the tax levy ordinances and the abatement ordinances. They will all be on next week's active agenda. That is all, unless someone really wants me to read them all. I can do that as well.
If we didn't have to go into the committee room to talk about stormwater, I just might take you up on it, but I don't think so. Thank you very much. That brings us to item 12, which pertains to council member reports. This is an opportunity for members of the village council to either share with those here or watching at home items of interest and other goings on in the community, or, like I just did a moment ago, share with the rest of our colleagues in the community any items of interest or pertinence from their roles as liaisons to other governmental entities. I'll start to my left tonight with Commissioner Barnett.
I have no report, Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Earl.
I have no report, Mayor.
Moving back over to the other side, Commissioner Jose.
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
Commissioner Waldeck.
I do have a report, Mayor. Let's just start off with a little bit of a guilt trip with the holidays here. We always encourage you to shop in Downers Grove, and especially the downtown area. And I just want people to think that when you hop in your car or you hop a train to go take your shopping dollars somewhere else, it's not just a matter of the sales tax, but the people who operate the shops, and they rely on the Christmas season for a lot of their profits. It could be a make or break deal. And when you go elsewhere, then think about that if you have a kid in school or you belong to an organization, what's the first place you think of when you have a play or a musical or some fundraising event, or when you want somebody to put a jar out to collect something for some cause? What's the first place you think of? Not hopping in the car, not hopping on a train and taking it there. You take your pamphlets and your ideas and that, and you take them to the downtown businesses, and they cooperate in the community spirit, and they like to advertise and make known your events. So this is your chance. You know, you rely on them the rest of the year to get these notices out, and just take a little time over the holidays to visit them. Some things that are going on, some important dates. The holiday window contest ends December 6th, so get your votes in. Santa's in his gingerbread house. I thought that belonged to the gingerbread man. Anyway, he's in his gingerbread house every Saturday and Sunday until December 17th from 1 to 4 p.m. It's complimentary. Bring your cameras. Merry Madness will begin December 14th. That's 10 days. 10 days left in the Christmas shopping area time. So that'll start December 14th. I understand that forms that are filled out for the gingerbread man hunt that are turned in that day, they're possibly having a special drawing for an additional prize, maybe on the 15th. Check the website for that. The Ginger Bucks rewards cards are good through the 24th. And I'm glad to announce that the gingerbread man hunt continues, but we're not really going to catch the guy. The object of the game is to see him and note it so that you can win a prize. So we're not going to do anything nasty to the gingerbread man. He gets off clean slate. You can go on www.downtowndg.org. You can get a form so that you can go look for the gingerbread man. If you fill out the form, complete it, get it over to the library. There's a prize there, and as I say, on December 14th, they have a special prize. So help get your Christmas shopping done. Visit downtown Downers Grove. We've got a lot of things still going on. It didn't just happen immediately after the tree lighting, so it's still going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate you sharing that all with us. I really do. Although I'm deeply, deeply disappointed that as a man who's known to emphasize his points with props, that you did not bring a gingerbread man with you.
We have 2 weeks to go.
I'm looking for him.
Touche. Thank you. Commissioner Wallace.
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner White.
No report.
And I have no further report. So with that, we cannot adjourn tonight. We are going to recess into the committee room, as mentioned, to discuss potential amendments to the village's stormwater management regulations. We will simply be broaching this topic for the first time and talking about some issues related to that and sharing information from the staff. I suspect this will be a long time coming. Before we do that, there might be some more manager's reports.
Yes, just real quick.
Okay. So we're not going to adjourn. I'm going to ask for a motion to recess to the committee room. But before I do, I want to take things back to Village Manager David Fieldman for any additional manager report items.
Yes, just a point of personal privilege. There is a special guest here with us tonight that I'd like to recognize, Anthony, who is an extraordinary midfielder with the Roadrunners U12 Select Soccer Team. I've had the pleasure of watching him do what he does best for many years. It's great to see that he's here to watch me do what I do best. It's good to see him. I hope he's enjoying tonight's meeting as much as I enjoy his game. So thanks, Anthony, for being here tonight. Just wanted to get a shout out. Thank you, Mayor.
Well, I appreciate that very much. Well done, and welcome, Anthony. And you can tell me later how you think he's doing. Very good. With that, I'll ask for a motion to recess into the committee room, please.
Until I move to this council, recess into the committee room.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We are going to recess in the committee room. We'll probably start up again in about 10 minutes. So those of you who are still here, please, you're welcome to join us and talk more about stormwater regulations. Now, I know, Anthony, you want to stick around for that. Thank you. Good night. Thank you for sticking around for the conversation. We are in the committee room, as mentioned, to begin our discussion, exploration, and identification of potential changes to the village's stormwater management regulations. And this is under the manager report, so I will turn things over to Village Manager David Fieldman to present the topic. I suspect that this will be discussed over some period of time.
Yes, this is the second or third meeting over a series of what we think will be several public meetings to make sure we have the proper dialogue to make great policy. As you know, the issue is code-compliant development in our community sometimes generates runoff that negatively affects the neighbors. Our objective with this project is to reduce the negative impacts of that runoff caused by that development activity. And we have another objective as well, which is from our comprehensive plan, which is to have a permitting process which should accommodate residential renovation and redevelopment. We have several challenges that we're facing with this. The first is that, as you know, that we have a lack of stormwater infrastructure in our village. The stormwater infrastructure is shown on this map right here. You don't need to read the whole map to know that the areas in red are part of our stormwater structure. In the areas where you don't see items in red is where our infrastructure is lacking, which is in the middle part of the village. This issue is exacerbated by the fact that this is the primary area where we see development activities. So I'll hold this map up here as well, juxtapose it. The triangles represent new single-family homes from 2011 to the present, and you'll see that in the same areas where we lack infrastructure, that's where most of the development activity is taking place. That's because these properties were subdivided prior to modern regulations, and so they weren't built with on-site drainage systems and they weren't built with public systems. As the mayor noted, we have some topography challenges in Downers Grove. It's beautiful. We have a lot of rolling hills, but when you combine rolling hills with areas without infrastructure, you get big puddles where things don't drain very well. They're sometimes called LPDAs, or localized poor drainage areas. They act a lot like floodplains, and they're regulated as such as well. We also have high clay content soils, which means once the water percolates just into the topsoil, it really isn't going anywhere. It sits right there at the level of clay, which means we get a high amount of runoff, which is unique to this area. So even though we have a lot of green space, the water's not really soaking into the ground as well as it does in other areas. Another set of challenges is residents. In this case, we're talking about residents who are the ones wishing to make improvements to their property or build a house or make an expansion to their driveway or what have you. And their neighbors set of differing expectations. I think all of the residents, we want to enjoy our property, we want to build what we want to build, our dream home, whatever it is that we have planned. And we expect to be able to do that quickly and make use of our property in the way that we'd like to enjoy it. Some of the neighbors, I think some of their expectations is that there will be literally no impacts of development activity on my property. So trying to balance those expectations because of the interrelated nature of the side-by-side properties can often be challenging. Another challenge in this project is actually achieving the balance of those two objectives. As I said, objective one is to reduce the negative impacts of runoff caused by development activity. And number two is to have a permit process that accommodates residential renovation and redevelopment. Those most times, oftentimes, actually work against each other. The more you achieve one, the less you achieve the other. As much as we try to strive for and solutions in the village, this has proven to be quite a challenge. Just a couple weeks ago at a village council meeting, the council gave us some direction to keep moving on this project. We took that direction as that we should explore regulations that would result in zero net impact on stormwater drainage, or also said another way, the idea of do no harm type of regulations. And so that's what we will present here tonight. Before we get into those regulations, just another sort of background set of notes about the stormwater management system. Really two systems combined to work in one larger system of stormwater management. A public system and an on-site private drainage system. The public system is exactly what you would expect. It's the system that stores and conveys runoff village-wide. It consists of public improvements, storm sewers, basins, those kinds of things. This system is funded publicly by stormwater utility fees. And we make improvements to this system through things like capital projects that we see in our community investment plan and maintenance activities. The other component or other system is the on-site drainage system. This is the system that stores and conveys runoff on a lot-by-lot or neighbor-to-neighbor type of environment. Primarily, it consists of private improvements funded by private property owners. There will be one exception to that. I'll talk later in the evening. These are funded by the private property owners. And when the village sets out to change how this system operates, we generally talk about changing regulations, rules of development, and that's what we're here tonight to talk about. These systems, when they are working optimally, are integrated from design and through construction. You think about a new subdivision or a new town that starts with a farm field or a green field, these systems are designed and constructed simultaneously, and they are integrated. And those systems work really well together, and we have examples of that in our village. Any subdivision in the 1960s or later, basically integrated. South side of town and the extreme north sides of town are examples of integrated systems working well. We have a challenge in the middle and older portions of our village. We are actively trying to integrate these two systems, but we're trying to do it retroactively, or retrofit. We don't really have the ability to sort of knock everything down and start fresh and clean and build a new system where one exists now. We're retrofitting. So we're constantly working on the public system through the stormwater utility, and we're working on development regulations. It's important to note that a complete integration, given this set of circumstances, is not possible. And what that means is while we can make improvements, really because we're retrofitting, we won't ever be able to come up with a system that works as well as a modern subdivision if you were starting new from scratch. Last set of background notes here is remember we are always striving to optimize or improve stormwater management, but this idea of solving it, we are not able to solve stormwater management issues because there will always be storm events that exceed the capacity of any system. So a complete solution is not possible, not just in Downers Grove, but frankly, anywhere. So a quick explanation of our existing development regulations, key regulations that relate to stormwater management. We have post-construction best management practices, rain gardens, those types of improvements. They are required once the threshold of 700 square feet of net new impervious area, or expansion of the impervious area, is hit. We also require detention, stormwater detention, at 25,000 square feet of net new impervious area. That is a lot of development before detention kicks in. We've established a maximum building coverage. This is not all of the improvements on properties, just those that are structures, houses, accessory structures, things that are 18 inches above the ground or higher. In most places, that maximum building coverage is 32%. And we have required setbacks for buildings in the side yards and a setback for sump pump discharges. These are the main components of our existing regulations. What we are presenting here tonight is a list of 8 potential regulations that can be used sort of a la carte, like a menu, or taken all together as a package. And these regulations that we'll go through tonight are intended to maximize objective number 1, runoff, mitigate negative impacts of runoff, and to maximize compliance with this idea of exploring zero impact or do no harm. So this is really on one other end of the extreme, if you will, for policy making. So we're not necessarily recommending these are just potential to try to move towards those things. Okay, the 8 potential regulations. Number 1 is the requirement to provide runoff volume storage, sometimes referred to as detention, at a threshold of 100 square feet of net new impervious. And that's represented here in this diagram as this basin. So volume storage triggered at 100 square feet net new impervious. Number 2, additional storage in that same basin or another basin on the site. That would be upsizing that storage by 20% or a minimum of 100 cubic feet for any development resulting in a deeper basement than exists in that lot right now. Right, so two types of storage. Volume storage based on net new impervious, additional storage for deeper basements. Number 3 regulation is the connection of this storage system to a public drainage system. So on our diagram here, you see a blue pipe, labeled number 3, running into a public system. So we got to connect this up to connect the on-site system to the public system. Number 4, the extension of the public system if necessary, and within 200 feet of the lot. We just said that we have several areas in town where we don't have public stormwater infrastructure. If that infrastructure is 200 feet away or less, this is a requirement that would cause you to have to bring it not only to the edge of your lot, but across the frontage of your lot so that it can tie into and maximize the effectiveness of the stormwater runoff system from the private system. Number 5 is an increased side yard setback. In most of our residential districts, especially those that consist of 50-foot wide lots, we have a 5-foot minimum side yard setback. We're proposing to increase that by 1 foot to 6 feet. This will result in more area to handle grade changes and drainage swales to convey water primarily to the public system. Number 6, a grant of easements for new construction. As I said earlier, a lot of the lots where houses are being redeveloped do not have easements or public access to the sides and rear yards as they would in a modern subdivision. This requirement would establish those easements for the village should we have to enter those areas to maintain the stormwater system. Number 7 is the creation of a maximum impervious coverage. This would take us from the idea of measuring only building impervious coverage to any type of impervious surface on the lot, establishing a maximum lot coverage in that regard. Number 8 is to increase the fee in lieu of those PCBMPs. Right now, fee in lieu is not really accurately charged in terms of the cost. It's not equal to the cost of actually constructing a BMP. We wanted to address that issue by increasing that fee. So you can see on the list of potential regulations, almost all of them are directly speaking to regulations about the on-site drainage system, except number 4, which is trying to connect the on-site drainage system to the public system. So this is an actual requirement in the development regulations that would require public extension. Okay, so that's where the two systems meet in this discussion. So what would the impacts be if the council were to direct us to do all 8 of these things? Well, the first thing is that more runoff would be stored and captured and conveyed. And we have some numbers up here showing that. We have under the existing set of codes and the potential set of codes, the amount of storage for 100 square feet of net new impervious, 700, and 5,000. And you can see for the smaller developments of 100, no storage required now. There'd be 57 cubic feet required under the potential. 700 square feet of net new impervious under our current code would store about 73 cubic feet. This would jump all the way up to 400 cubic feet. And then you see when you get to the larger projects, a 5,000 square foot net new impervious, right now about 520 cubic feet of storage, would jump all the way up to over 2,800 cubic feet of storage. I think that's intended to show you the sort of magnitude of the impact of how well we're doing to store and mitigate those runoff issues. We also have some estimated costs here. Under the existing code, in all these scenarios, the cost of these required improvements is between $0 and $10,000, give or take. There are some exceptions. We know the potential, those costs increase dramatically, and they will range from about $500 in the best case scenario to up to $15,000 if you're building the basin and the connection. In addition to that, if you have to extend the public system, as in number 4, the numbers would jump up considerably. We estimate that it costs about $300 per linear foot to extend public stormwater sewer system. So that's $300 a foot. This could be up to, let's say, 300 feet of sewer extension. That's up to $90,000 in the worst case scenario. So we think most of these, when this would be triggered, would be somewhere between $20,000 and say $40,000. So you can see the cost impact of potential regulation number 4. Other impacts, as I said, we would absolutely be maximizing objective number 1 of reducing runoff. Objective number 2, frankly, I think we would not be meeting much of accommodation of residential renovation and redevelopment. Although it could still take place, it would just be more costly and time consuming. So building permit submittal requirements to show compliance with these regulations would go up dramatically, which means our permit review times and the cost of obtaining that permit would go up dramatically. We just talked about the increase in the cost of construction, also up dramatically. We think this would be a challenge. We would probably not meet applicant expectations, especially on smaller projects where they may not be expecting to encounter these type of regulations at all. And therefore, there would be several projects likely to be undertaken without the required permit. Obviously, the village staffing resources would have to be increased if we did all 8 of these regulations. We're estimating 4 new staff members would be required to implement this properly. One other thing I wanted to point out here is sort of the lack of alignment between costs of these regulations as proposed in some of the smaller projects. If we set the threshold for all these requirements at 100 square feet net new impervious, that would capture things like minor driveway expansions, small accessory structures, and you can imagine those may be measured in a couple $1,000s, and you might be in a situation where you have to spend tens of thousands of dollars to comply. So this would be, if we did it just like this, would clearly be a heavy burden on smaller projects. There's also an impact that there is some difficulty of designing and constructing public sewer extensions on a piecemeal basis, one segment at a time. How big is it? At what depth should it go? How will it connect up to future extensions? Those types of things. There will be an interesting impact on the tear-down market for replacing of existing homes with new homes. What the builders will be looking for here is they're going to try to find lots that already have a lot of impervious area on them. So think detached garages with long driveways. That's to try to not hit the threshold to have to put in the requirements here. As far as the impact on actual construction activity, we're not really sure. We don't have a lot of data on this. We know that Elmhurst has similar regulations, but they have a more extensive public system. When they instituted similar storage requirements, they did not see negative impact in terms of construction activity and building permit numbers in Elmhurst. So I went through that rather quickly. It's a lot of information to go through. For those watching, I just want everybody to know I did meet with each council member separately for over an hour to walk through all these regulations. So a lot of the questions the council members had have already been asked. We published those questions with their responses on our website if you're interested in any of those. There also is some supplemental information, pie charts, sort of the breakdown of each type of permit by 100 square foot increments of net new impervious that may be helpful in furthering this discussion. So with that, I'm going to take a seat and ask Stan and Nan to join me, and we're happy to help facilitate a council discussion or answer any questions.
Thank you. So it's interesting that we began tonight's meeting with a new intro video that was all about balance. And I think that is something that we ought to keep in mind with this conversation. I fully appreciate the exploration of the different options, because without knowing what the options are, you can't identify what the spectrum is of where you want to end up. So it's very, very helpful to have these suggestions, and there may be even more or different ones. But certainly this is a conversation we've never had to this extent before, laying these things out and understanding a little bit more about what their impacts may or may not be, as well as the cost burdens. But I think ultimately this is going to be a conversation that we're going to have over some period of time about achieving some balance between obviously getting to the goal of reducing the impact of stormwater and minimizing the future impacts of stormwater, as has often been said. We put a lot of time and effort into dealing with stormwater issues. We certainly want to be creating new ones if we can avoid it. But on the other hand, I think there are some examples at the other end of the spectrum where I think you gave an example about a $1,000 driveway project should not cost somebody $15,000 to come into compliance. That also seems to be absurd, and we have a riot on our hands in the community if we start demanding those kind of things. But those are the extremes. And somewhere in the middle, I think, lies the right balance, and that's what we're going to, I suspect, try to do over the next whatever period of time, is try to come up with some balance. Understanding, of course, that while we like to get it right, there have been things we've tried in the past that we thought were good ideas at the time and ultimately didn't work in the field, and we made adjustments as we went. So that's really all I want to say to start things off. I'm really interested to hear the conversation and comments from both members of the council and later on members of the public. Stunned silence came over the crowd. Questions, comments?
Well, Mayor, I agree with you, and I think that finding a balance is going to be key here. Requiring basins obviously would, and we've seen in the past, would be the best option in terms of decreasing a lot of these issues that we're having. However, we also, I don't think, want builders to view downers in a way that we're difficult to work with, or things take too long, or we require too much. You know, these basins, I was the one that asked about these pictures, and just looking at them, I'm like, oh my God, that's in somebody's backyard. And thinking about how much space they take up, and you know, people like to have things in their backyards, gardens, etc. So I don't know. I really hope that we're able to find a balance here. A lot of people deal with this issue in town, and I absolutely believe we need to find a solution. However, I don't want to drive people away either who would like to come to Downers or build in Downers.
Right, and I think you've actually hit upon one other distinction, and there may be some distinctions we can draw here. So, for example, new construction is obviously a different story than somebody who wants to do a patio or a deck or a small addition or a shed. It's not just about driving new construction away from town, it's also, we don't want to discourage people from reinvesting in their existing homes, maintaining them, adding to them. We saw tonight an example of a historic home where there was an addition done in order to make that home something that the resident would continue to live in landmark, and something that will become of value for many generations. That's not activity we want to discourage or make cost prohibitive. But that's not necessarily the same as new construction. New construction, you have a lot more leeway in many cases because you're really talking about something that's been scraped and you can start from scratch. And I think there's probably less sympathy with an additional $20, $50, whatever $1,000 it might be to do some things, as opposed to someone that's living in a home that was built in 1923 and simply wants to do some things to bring it more up to modern standards. We don't want to make it so cost prohibitive that they can't do that, and then they don't. And you can just imagine the slippery slope that goes from there. And I mean, there's some communities already have issues with property maintenance challenges. We don't want to bring on a whole other set of headaches inadvertently. I'm mindful of do no harm is broader than just stormwater. We want to do no harm, period. But that, I think, comes down to trying to achieve some appropriate balance. So one distinction I'll draw is I'm much more zealous with respect to what we can do with new construction. I think we need to be more mindful of achieving balance when we're dealing with other things that are not a complete new project where someone basically has open field to do all kinds of things in a much better way, and also well, it's easier from a practical standpoint, and there's also an issue of what percentage of the value of the property in the home that's being constructed does that really represent, as opposed to someone who is already living in a pre-existing structure.
And as someone who's done an addition in the past year and a half, this absolutely would have affected us and our very, very tight budget in doing said addition.
Right, and we want to encourage people to stay and reinvest in our homes in our community, not be forced to move because...
So I'm very cognizant of that.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I was, this all seems very logical with new house, existing house addition, but I think where it starts to get fuzzy is where that line is. What is considered an addition? Yep. Is it 2 walls and the foundation, stays and everything else gets torn down and we expand the basement and then it's considered still an addition? Or, it looks like a completely new house from the street. How do you, where does the line get drawn? How do you reconcile some of that I have seen happen on my own block? Yes, there's brand new houses that have been scraped and started from scratch, but there's also, ones where 2 walls and the foundation remained. They expanded the foundation, and up went something that looked nothing like what they started with. And it becomes a completely different animal than just a simple, a little square addition off the back, a new little, spare room off the back. So where does that line get drawn, I guess, is a big question for me.
It's a $200 million question.
Huh?
No, and to the point of remodeling and additions and whatnot, when you look at the numbers, 84% of remodels and additions, according to the stats here, are actually under the 100 square foot threshold. That's a pretty high percentage that would end up not being subject to even the most stringent volume storage here that we're looking at 100 square feet of net new impervious. We do need to find a way to make sure we don't overly burden that remaining 16%, number one. And number two, it doesn't take into account any number of other things, whether it's driveways or a small deck, something to that effect. But I am hopeful that we can find a balance here that doesn't impact too dramatically reinvestment in folks.
Right, and I was struck by that statistic too initially, but I think we also have to think more beyond what's behind those numbers, because you can imagine some homes would be that's in that 16%, perhaps the ones that we would most like to see reinvestment in preservation, for example. Whereas maybe some of the other ones, it's a kitchen remodel or something very small that's not as big an issue. But that 16%, depending on what it reflects, can be a much bigger. I don't know.
But we're talking net new impervious, right? So kitchen remodel wouldn't trigger any of this.
Well, I think that goes to show you there's a lot of reinvestment going on that has nothing to do with impervious space, which is good.
What's the level of negative impact? Maybe we should look at it the other way. What's the level of negative impact that everybody's comfortable pushing on neighbors? So for your addition, how much additional negative impact to your neighbors should we be willing to allow? And that's the question. Zero impact, do no harm. That's the question. Everybody likes balance. People like compromise and balance. Those are words that people enjoy. But what is the level of negative impact we're willing to say as the village we think is okay?
The difficulty with the question is that there are different answers in different neighborhoods, right? Because we've got a different level of infrastructure all throughout the village, and it changes, in some cases.
Yeah, because in my neighborhood, we don't struggle as much as another
So
neighborhood.
the impact on our neighborhood would be much different, I think, than it would be on Commissioner Wallace's than it may be on Commissioner White's or Commissioner Waldeck's.
No, maybe I didn't say that right, or maybe I'm just not following you. Could be either one. But certainly different parts of town have different existing infrastructure that makes handling additional stormwater easier or harder. But we are building village facilities, and we're building village systems, and we're managing village systems, and people buy their properties. So if we're going to allow some level of impact, some balance of not wanting to shut down or stifle development, what level of additional burden is the village willing to accept, and what levels of additional burden is the village willing to say is okay to push on neighbors? If you allow something other than zero, then you're saying there's some degree of that you allow. It may be the case, but it's hard to say. I think it's not. I think it's a little. I think it misses, from my vantage point, it misses the point. The discussion that we're trying to have is, do we want to achieve these do no harm issues? We can say, it's obvious to say, well, I'm not sympathetic to a big, okay, and right, ideally, yes, but if we're not going to be ideal, then we have to say to people, we have to say to residents who come to us that yes, we understand you've been negatively affected by your neighbor's addition, And we're okay with that up to some point. That's the point that's in question. We can come at it from two ways. How much impact do we want to force on them, or how much are we willing to allow? It's coming back at it two ways. But it's important to characterize it that way, because that is what we would be saying. If we said we didn't like 100, we were going to pick 7, pick 35, pick something that made us, with the pie charts, feel better about the potential burden to development. The other flip side of that is we're saying we're willing to allow a certain degree of these negative impacts. That's the question I think I would enjoy hearing people. I'm not willing to allow any. I think it's kind of ridiculous that we say to people it's okay by village ordinance to take your neighbor's situation and diminish it as a function of improving your own.
I understand, but I think there's a huge risk for unintended long-term consequences that will end up harming those neighbors as much, if not more.
You might be right.
That's what I'm
concerned about. You just need to say that to people.
Do no harm is broader than just runoff. It's do no harm to the community, it's do no harm to the property values, it's do no harm to the base for our schools. It goes on and on and on, and I don't mean to sound dystopian about it, but I do want to be mindful of unintended consequences. The other thing that I think I wanted to ask about, and yes, the kitchen remodel is a bad example, but a shed. The point is that, to Commissioner Jose's point, it does matter, I think, to some degree, and correct me if I'm wrong, about the lot size. If you're talking about net new impervious, let's say you have a 50 by 100 lot, I'm sorry, that's a bad example, 75 by 100 lot, as opposed to a 50-foot by whatever, 65-foot lot, the impact upon that homeowner to these requirements is going to be very different. So, for example, to Commissioner Wallace's point, where you put that and what you can do is going to potentially hugely impact the value to the neighbor. So I would flip it around and say, to what impact, what harm are you willing to impose upon people that they're not currently experiencing with respect to the usage of the property?
And I think it's one level deeper than that, in that we could go straight to 100, but 100 square feet net new impervious in some areas of town is really not going to have a whole lot of impact, but in other areas of town
That's
might
exactly
have a
my
tremendous
point.
amount of impact.
That's exactly my point.
Let's try to
So
go
I
back
think
to a technical question.
it's a sliding scale.
I have an engineering question.
As long as it's not a physics question.
No, well, no, but this isn't to the philosophical or the political aspect of this. It has to do with my understanding of zero net impact. From a civil engineering point of view, is it possible to evaluate whether new net impervious will cause additional stormwater to flow directly to the street or to a stormwater system and not encroach on neighboring lots, compared with encroaching on neighboring lots? Because if someone builds a big house and every gallon of water goes to a pipe that goes immediately to the storm sewer in front of the house, and it doesn't flow onto the neighbor,
right.
That's zero. So, but the question is, can that be measured? Is that feasible?
Well,
when looking at a topographical,
you're kind of getting at what I was talking about. Is another example. Let's say you had something that was built relatively recently, because there's also no distinction here about when was this built. But you could have something that was built in the last 5 years with designed new construction built in the last 5 years, and it has swales. It has all these different things that are designed to achieve basically proper stormwater management. Somebody wants to put a 100-foot of whatever shed. What's the impact?
But if there's an objective way to measure that from an engineering, that's because we may be asking, this may be a question that's not technically feasible. So that's really, or at what expense is it? Because you can measure anything if you want to pay enough money. I mean, that's what Fermilab exists to measure things. They spend billions of dollars to measure things, So we probably could measure it at a huge expense. So is it practical to be able to evaluate a building permit to determine whether they impact the neighboring lot, or whether the additional impervious will simply flow into the street and it won't touch the neighbors? How hard is it to measure that?
Well, that gets back to the point Dave made, I think, earlier in the presentation, where this is not an integrated system between the private and the public. If you're designing a subdivision from scratch, you'd place the top of elevation just so, higher than the street, higher than the side yards. You'd have a certain capacity in the swales. There'd be a certain percent slope from down a whole block that would take the water, and it'd be sized to carry this certain sizes of storms. So I think it would be very difficult, not just neighborhood by neighborhood, but almost lot by lot, depending on the existing grading, to make that work perfectly.
So I think where I want to go with this is that
and I don't know the answer to this question, but I suspect that the cost to measure zero net impact to somebody that applies for a building permit could be quite substantial. That the engineering fees that an applicant would have to pay.
If it was easy, we'd already be doing it.
No, so that proving that you have zero net impact could itself be very expensive.
It will be.
Yeah.
The design engineers and our engineering staff will be able to look at topography, grading plans, et cetera, and get a pretty good handle on where the water is going to run off and how much it's going to be stored. And that, since they get close, doesn't take a whole lot more to be exact, is highly impractical. And that's why we're using sort of proxy.
Well, you have to, because let's all not forget about the bullet point that says resident/neighbor expectations. What people think is no net impact and what is a proxy for no net impact may be very different. And someone may actually spend $20,000 to $30,000 and still get the complaints.
They will.
They will, which is another reason why you now force someone to lessen the use of their property. And again, I'm not talking about new construction. New construction, I think, actually, there's a lot you can do with new construction. It doesn't raise some of these concerns. I'm talking about existing structures where it's not even necessarily an addition, or it's a small addition, or it's a shed, or it's a deck, or it's something like that. Driveway expansion. And someone may spend $15,000, and it's not going to solve the neighbor complaints at all. So now what we have is both problems.
That goes to whether you set it at 100, 200, 300, 400, 500. That's a sliding scale.
Right. But I think
so we can say projects below 100 NNI.
Right.
Projects below 200 NNI.
Right.
Projects before 400. I mean, where do you draw that line?
But I also do it by discussion about, we all know what we're talking about because no net impact and all that. We've discussed that for some time. But I think in the broader community, what that means and how that gets communicated is going to be very important for expectations, because you're right. It's going to be people who are going to spend a lot of money. They're going to be very angry, go through a long process, spend a bunch of money on something they don't think was justified, or their use of their property has now been minimized or even devalued, and their neighbor's still going to be upset. It's like, well, you said no net impact. Look, I got soggy grass right here. Liars. You're failing to do what you promised.
That will have, we need to all have sort of in our head, I would suggest that is going to be one of the outcomes. If we do all, whatever the number is, 8 things, or we do 0 things, either way, managing that expectation is going to be near impossible, because the whole idea of what really happens, where water really moves to and from, is largely difficult to understand without actually modeling a site. Excuse me. And people have opinions about what has happened before. So I say that because I want to some degree, try and diminish our thoughts on managing those expectations. It's incumbent on us to try to recognize they exist, but I think we all have to also realize that we will not manage them.
Well, and that also goes to the balance point, which is where we know that that's going to happen. No matter what improvements we adopt, eventually, we're still going to have a dissatisfied group of folks that still think that they're being unduly affected no matter what we do. I think that we need to take into account in terms of then what burden you're going to put on existing property owners, the enjoyment of the property, the additional costs that you run, because now you're charging people, and again, I'm talking about some of the extreme examples where you're charging folks money, you're diminishing the use of their property, and we're not achieving the goal. I'm not saying we don't do it. I'm in favor of doing something, and again, I sort of put new construction off to the side for me, because I think you do a lot of things with new construction that don't raise any of the concerns that I'm articulating. I'm really talking about the other things, and this kind of reminds me of the whole residential redevelopment discussion we had 10 years ago, where everybody was talking about the new construction teardowns. We're just focusing on these other things that also can have an impact upon neighborhoods, construction, maintenance, and all different things in terms of setbacks and whatnot, and green space. It's the bigger picture that I think we want to manage. So I think there's balance, not just in a seesaw way. I think there's balance here in more of a, think of it as a dodecahedron that we're trying to balance here. There's a lot of different competing facets here that I think we have to take into consideration.
Let's try to pick out the pieces we can agree on instead of just butting heads and things. Because I
don't think anybody's butting heads. I think we're just talking about things that we need to take into consideration.
One of the things that's different about as opposed to residential development rules, though, is that you're talking about the actual impact of this as a person's, one property owner's diminished ability to use their property, in some cases, actual damage. That's different than redevelopment rules. if our redevelopment rules were causing people's neighbors' trees to die, that would be similar. We're talking about situations where people's homes are adversely impacted in a material way. That's the risk that we run when we run our current system. Now, to what degree we can actually ameliorate that, fair question.
Right, and the point is...
it's a way different thing than just...
That's the objective. There may be ways, to Commissioner White's point and others, that we need to take into account of how to achieve that objective. It isn't necessarily sort of a formulaic, because it's really about, are you avoiding the harm?
But my point was, why don't we talk about new construction for a while and move away from a swimming pool or a sidewalk and just take that, just put that discussion aside for the moment. What do we want to do if somebody builds a new house on a vacant lot or adds 1,000 or 5,000 net new impervious? I think, first of all, wouldn't we all agree that a truly substantial addition where you doubled the square foot of the house counts as new construction for purposes of this discussion?
For purposes of this discussion, let's just assume that we're talking about new construction, something that's substantially different than what was previously there.
In terms of impervious, right?
However you want to measure it. Or an addition that is essentially akin to the first category.
Like my house, I double the size.
For the purpose of this discussion, fine. I just want to lay all that out. I think there's a lot of things we can talk about, but now I agree with you. Let's break it up and talk about some of the things. So for new construction, obviously some of these things do still come at a cost, but I suspect from a practical standpoint, I mean, number one, people are already going through extensive permitting and inspections. You've got the ability to trench stuff all over creation, which you have to do anyway. You're doing things like excavation and demolition, and you're putting in some kind of basement usually. So being able to put in vaults and all those things is a lot easier for new construction or a substantial addition. So I suspect that from a practical standpoint, from a frustration standpoint, from a cost standpoint, tell me if I'm wrong, it's probably a lot less.
Correct. And to that point, when we start talking about new construction, anything that would clearly be classified without any sort of controversy, is it a new house? We don't have to start it measuring at net new anything. You can actually just require the volume storage based on the size of impervious, regardless of what was there in the first place. And that's actually something from the pre-wire conversations that seemed that most council members would be open to talking about that. So you could do new single families literally starting the calculation at not incremental impervious, just impervious, right? For all the reasons the mayor just said.
Just on that point real quick though, comparing fairness to different neighborhoods, a house that's in an area that's already been well developed, I mean, was developed more recently, then a lot of the work will already be done.
Correct.
So the cost to the builder, if you tear down a house down in either in Orchard Brook or Wayfair South, where there's all the great infrastructure already, the cost to the builder to comply is going to be much less.
Correct.
Because there's infrastructure already there.
Right.
And if you build that house in a neighborhood that doesn't have any infrastructure, the cost is going to be more.
Right.
So there's a certain inherent fairness that's going to...
Right. It should be reflected in the resulting land values, which are affected by regulations all the time.
Okay, I just wanted to, okay.
So I'd like to just see if we can get sort of head nods. I think all council members are saying, requiring this kind of volume storage and additional basement depth storage makes sense for what we all would consider a new single-family house.
If you're deep in the basement, you trigger the rules. I mean, that's...
Right, so 1 and 2 and 3 for anything
Would
new.
it be different for, let's say, a tear-down type situation, a single house, as opposed to a small development?
When you get in,
where you can, if you're building, I don't know, 4 houses or...
Maybe the last split.
Or 8, and then...
Subdivide that.
anything that's a subdivision is already required to comply with subdivision codes, and frankly, we haven't had as many issues with any type of actual subdivision. We've required the storage as it come through.
So we're really talking about the individual...
Lot by lot type of development for the most part. So I just want to double check that I think I'm hearing requiring 1, 2, and 3 for a new single-family house.
I think you're going to continue to discuss and explore those because they seem to make more sense with what we're calling new construction.
Well, I got 4 to that, too.
That's what I want to make sure I understand here. Let's number 4, this is where a lot of the costs are. This idea of if it's something nearby, you have to extend it. If it's not nearby, you'd have to pay cash in lieu based on the actual cost. We'd probably pick 75 foot of frontage or 100 foot of frontage, so your cash in lieu would be in the range of 22 to 30,000 per lot if it's nowhere near, and that money would go into the stormwater fund. So thoughts on this type of requirement?
Doesn't it, let's swing back the other way in this conversation just to aggravate everybody. Doesn't that kind of work against the point, though, if our goal is to drive development, redevelopment, new construction in the direction of helping our system, helping the village's system, then what we've just said makes a lot of sense. If the goal or the driver here is to do no harm or zero impact, then that's the reason you're talking about, that's the reason we're talking about NNI, right? So think about single lot residential redevelopment, complete redevelopment. That lot, that parcel has an existing NNI, right? So if they take the whole building down, what we've just said is we still want them to do all this stuff, but that may not really be required if NNI is the goal.
Well, except if the existing structure is already causing stormwater problems for the neighbors. Don't you want to fix it?
What my primary driver is not to...
It's not doing more harm, it's doing no harm.
No, it's to do well. But what we're talking about now is saying we want redevelopment to be charged with helping improve our overall system, which might be a reasonable goal. But there's a difference between saying all new construction where it's a tear down has to go through that, as opposed to saying only NNI changes do it. Because you could take down a lot and have no new net impervious area with completely new structure, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that would strike me as having, there's a different result of that. We're charging redevelopment to improve our system. It's just different.
Well, sure, but we've done that with sidewalks for 20 years.
We do get complaints on new single-family construction where there is no change in net new impervious, primarily because they are disturbing the entire lot when they build. We heard this at the Stormwater Floodplain Oversight Committee by quite a few residents that attended that discussion. So the builder's coming in, scraping off all the dirt, putting it in a pile, distributing the material and compacting it, which is primarily clay, and then putting sod on it. So it's effectively changing the runoff coefficient of that lot. Even though the net new impervious wasn't dramatically changed or changed at all, it did cause complaints from neighbors.
Plus with the grading changes, right?
And grading
Which is what Commissioner White was talking about. How do you model that?
And as Dave mentioned earlier, sometimes we get developers that'll buy a deep lot with a garageway in the back, and you get all that impervious. And then if you put it all in the one same spot, which is closer to the other houses adjacent to it, and you take a smaller house and build a bigger house in the same footprint, add it in the compaction, and the other issues, that's where we see some complaints.
that would address that issue of the picking and choosing of lots to try to avoid triggering things if you just had to do it no matter what.
Just happening right now.
See, but I think avoiding the picking and choosing of lots also, it seems to me, from the point of view of our system, reduces the transaction costs. Because I think we always have to remember that the cost of measuring is not free. That it's very expensive to measure. How much does it cost for a food truck permit? That's an enormously complicated question, not easily answered. So therefore, to know how much. So if we say, well, I don't want a new. I personally wouldn't want a new home builder to be able to build a new home and be one NNI underneath the limit, because they left most of the house, because then they're measuring. So I'd incline that if it's basically a new house, we haven't fully defined what that means, but if it's basically a new house, they got to comply with the rules as if they bought an undeveloped lot.
Sure. There's also the opportunity to make a situation better. I mean, maybe they're not increasing any impervious at all, but you've got stormwater problems.
That's what we'll have.
Yeah, so this gives you an opportunity to improve it.
Bob, could I ask you to elaborate on the picking and choosing of lots comment that you made? That there was my comment. But I'm sorry, your comment. But Bob, I heard it from last, is the picking of choosing of lots that's going on now. What exactly you mean?
Yeah. So, Dave, maybe you could sketch
Yeah.
the easiest thing.
Yeah.
No way over here.
Yeah, let's go over here real quick. So the idea is that because the current regulations are triggered on incremental change, what developers and home builders are looking for is a lot that already has a lot of impervious area compared to its value, the cost to purchase. And so if you have two lots in a neighborhood, both improved with like 1950s ranches or Cape Cods or whatever, and one of them's a small house like this and it has an attached garage and a driveway like that, that has a very small amount of impervious, right? Small amount. Next door could be the exact same size house, could be appraised for the same value, give or take.
Yeah, with two garages and a turn-in. Actually, there's one right down, well, there's one on Cornell. I can tell you about that has exactly that.
This is our neighborhood here.
Yeah, I know exactly what house you're talking about.
On this one, my neighbor's that one. So what happens is this has a large base impervious area, right? So builders are looking to buy this lot before they look to buy this lot because they're trying to stay under the existing threshold.
So that's a situation where there's a lot of runoff that's been generated for however long, and there's an opportunity to improve it rather than somebody coming in and saying, well, I'm not making anything worse.
To clarify, I'm all in on all 8 all the time. I just wanted to make sure we were all realizing that the effect of saying getting off NNI was to cause there to basically be probably improvements beyond the VC directional goal, that's all.
Yes, and plus
solution.
The other thing, the cash in lieu of, I have a little problem with that. I mean, it's nice that you have money that you can use to improve somewhere else, but the idea is to improve the stormwater situation in that location. And when you start saying cash in lieu of, you're really saying if you got the bucks, you can get away with it. And that's not really what we want to do. We want to solve the problem with this particular lot or assortment of lots rather than having somebody just buy it off.
No, I don't disagree with you, Commissioner. I think this is primarily focused on those situations where you've got something that's going to trigger all these requirements, and there isn't a public system anywhere near. So what are they trenching to?
Right.
It's like the sidewalk, where it would be just a sidewalk in front of one house in a block. It's a sidewalk that goes nowhere. Well, actually, we try not to do that. We do the in lieu of because
still
there's
the idea of cash in lieu of.
Because if the nearest facility is a half a mile away, you're not going to make somebody trench all the way to that. That's ridiculous.
So what's interesting about this is all the policy trade-offs. If we don't charge the cash in lieu when the system is further away, we're actually going to drive developments, encourage the development in the areas that are underserved. And if you charge the cash in lieu, you immediately set an expectation with that owner. I just paid my 30 grand. When is that pipe coming in? Which puts a lot of pressure on sort of the village finances too, because if you had only one home and it was 1,000 feet away from the sewer, but they paid it, they expect that money to go to use immediately. So now try being in Nan's shoes and we say, okay, you got all the 20 projects you're supposed to do and plan for years in advance, and now we have 19 neighbors that all expect their pipe to go in 19 different neighborhoods, and by the way, they all want it now. So there's a lot of policy trade-offs that go with that as well.
But they have to pay for it, in my opinion.
They have to pay for it under the potential.
How we handle it is complicated, but that cost has to be paid for by the developer.
With regard to number 4, what kind of maintenance concerns are we looking at? Construction concerns, things like that. I mean, it's one thing when we're building it, it's another thing when somebody else is building it.
Use an approved contractor, I imagine.
Yeah, they'd have to meet whatever design specifications we put in place. It would have to pass inspection. Earlier, I said there'd be some challenges with designing it piecemeal, and maybe Nan could speak a little bit to that concept.
Well, in areas where there's really very little infrastructure, we'd have to kind of take a look at the whole area to size the pipe, kind of look and see how deep we'd want the pipe to work with the future system, where we really have done no design up to that point. In some cases, it would be just a simple extension. In some places, it would involve more engineering earlier than we probably would have been looking in that neighborhood.
Let me just ask you a different question, since you brought up maintenance, and this isn't a reason not to to do what we're talking about. I'm just curious, because I know in subdivisions where we've required detention ponds and things like that, we typically will have some kind of a mechanism, both ability and funding, should down the road that detention retention facility fail to be maintained and no longer functions as advertised. Because all this works great as long as it's working. But we're talking about things on private property. So we put in this big vault. We make somebody put in a big vault, and I realize this may take time, but over time it fails. It's not maintained, it fails, it no longer functions. We now are back to causing harm to the neighborhood. What mechanisms, will we use similar mechanisms to be able to get in there and A, get it fixed, and B, have a funding mechanism for it?
Traditionally, villages in this situation have used lien rights and the ability to charge back for the maintenance that's required and not done, plus an interest rate, and then lien the property. To your point, if people start to not properly maintain it, then it's a burden on the village to make sure that we have to use our own crews, and it can create some challenges.
Right, which is why we've, number one, made sure in those subdivisions that we have the legal right to go in and do the work ourselves, but number two, also a funding mechanism, so it's not being subsidized by the taxpayers, it's being paid for by the person responsible for maintaining it.
Yes.
Well, right, which is the SSAs and other mechanisms like that when you're dealing with the subdivision or a PUD. But when you're dealing with a single lot, you may end up, I mean, what's our ultimate remedy? Foreclosing in the house to pay to maintain?
Yeah, it's like a weed cutting lien.
It's
let the grass go too high.
Yeah, we use this in a lot of arenas of maintenance, but not in something that is as complicated and negatively impactful.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. We're not talking about cutting the grass. We're talking about maybe a $50,000, $75,000 maintenance project on a detention vault.
We would try to use other enforcement rather than self-help and liens. Enza's looking at me like, don't let us do this, because from a legal standpoint, this is incredibly challenging. So we would try to use other enforcement tools rather than us getting onto people's property and charging a lien back.
I can see the drain holes getting clogged, but I don't see it'd be very rare for a total collapse of the system. It needs to be
some
replaced.
of them have pumps.
No, some are mechanical. Absolutely.
But a pump's not going to cost $50,000.
No, but when it fails and doesn't get maintained, the damage.
The consequential damage, but not the cost of the maintenance. Well, people have homeowners insurance.
Well, that's assuming people are all cooperating.
Yeah.
I'm talking about we have 100 of these where they're fighting us.
Homeowners for anything.
And this should be addressed before we finish the project.
Yeah, no, I'm not suggesting don't do it because of that reason. That's just your mention of maintenance has made me think they have to make sure that we, because after a while you think about it over the long term, over 20 years, you suddenly have 50, 60 of these things, and another 20 years later. I'll be sitting in retirement all day.
How long?
Eventually it'll happen.
How long has Elmhurst had their rules that are similar to this?
A couple years now, right? Not enough to understand long-term maintenance impacts.
Are there other communities in the country maybe that have had this for long term?
We can look.
Because if somebody's had this for 15 or 20
not
years.
unlike a septic system, those have been in place for many years. Some are mechanical, some are not mechanical.
It would be similar.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know how the enforcement and funding of that works.
Commissioner Wallace just asked quietly, how long do these pumps usually last?
Correct.
It's probably similar to like a sump pump. I mean, it's really the same. It's a pump. It's probably some difficult circumstances it's operating in with material that can clog it and things like that. It's not easy. It's probably more difficult to maintain for a homeowner than a sump pump would be to maintain, I would think. A sump pump's in a little bit more of a controlled environment.
And difficult to replace?
I don't think so. It's just a basic pump.
Okay.
But it's outside in the elements. It's probably in a pit in your yard.
So what you want to do is leave your current profession, start a new company that specializes in maintaining pumps for storage tanks. Big business opportunity.
No, thanks.
But not every lot's going to need a pump. Well, there's
No, not every
yeah, most can be gravity flow. Yeah.
That septic's a good analogy, though. There are a lot of septics with lift requirements to get to sand, and then there's also extensions in unincorporated areas where you have to get up to.
Although the difference is the homeowner is highly motivated to fix the septic tank, maybe not so with the stormwater.
Yeah. Stormwater's probably a problem for him, too. So what about 5, 6, and 7, and 8 for new construction?
So can we talk a little bit more about 4, recognizing we're not making any decisions here tonight, just trying to get an understanding what we want to keep talking about, or if we want to eliminate. I'd like to hear a little bit more about 4 on new construction, which is the extension concept.
I support having the developers pay the extension to the public. Otherwise, the public has to pay it. And we're paying it with a fee system rather than taxes. That's actually problematic.
I don't see any reason not to treat it any different than we have traditionally sidewalks, where if it makes sense to connect it to our system, we do it. We require them to do it and pay for it. But if it's not connecting to anything, it makes no sense. I think you're actually being very polite about the design challenges. Imagine putting a pipe in the ground that just sits there and there's nothing to connect to it for 10 years. Codes could be different, for crying out loud. Could be, who knows? That doesn't make any sense.
I mean, I might think about, I mean, you said 200 feet. This just popped into my head, and maybe there's good reasons not to, but I'd be willing to consider that if it's 300 feet, then they pay a large percentage of it, but not all of it. You know, so that the idea that with the goal being to extend the public system, like we had a sidewalk, we just want sidewalks everywhere.
Like a cost share program?
If it's really close, 200 feet, they pay all of it. If it's 300 feet, they pay 2/3 of it, something like that. And where that number is, I don't know, but the idea of extending the public infrastructure where it currently does not exist should be a goal.
I totally agree with that premise, but I think there was that one question, I don't know if it was answered in the things that we're still looking at it.
Yeah, we're still trying to determine it.
You know, there's a reasonable concern that there's a lot of parcels way beyond 200, and I don't know if we want to be talking about back to expectations about what I paid my in lieu would be the same thing. I don't know if we want to be picking up saying to people when they build, they pay their 200 feet, we're picking up the rest.
Well, and that's where we kind of get back to, and I don't know how to do this, I'm just raising a question, but what is the configuration of the lot? Because you're right, you can look at some of those lots that are on Cumner and Florence, very deep lots. And if you've got to run a pipe there, you're running a pipe across the width of Iowa.
Well, and some of them are blocks before there's any existing system, per se. And so you all of a sudden don't have not only the one distance, you've got the opportunity for multiple parcels within there that are all faced with that challenge.
Right. So anyway, I think what I'm hearing is the concept that people are in favor of, but the details need some work.
Any objectors to that summary? Okay, thank you.
Usually when they object to my summary, somebody throws something at me.
Yeah. So then the...
Can we skip 5 for a second?
Yes.
Go to 6. I mean, an issue with easements? I don't have a problem with easements.
I want to remind everybody that the answer is no, but keep in mind Dave just rolled in front of it.
Trying to keep out of the way.
But easements is another example of how we're going to have, so we've got right now a situation, I'm going to just characterize these things in extremes just for the purpose. So a guy comes in to us and sends us a couple emails and shows up at a couple meetings and says, these 2 new houses have made my yard flood. And then they're gone. The flip side is going to be the case. We're going to have a lot of people on a regular basis feeling misused or abused or put behind the 8 ball as a result of any of this, even the easement thing. I assure you there will be a whole new round of staff challenges that are far different, and they're like the whole other side of the equation, because now everything seems like a ridiculous burden they don't understand. And it's just, if we get 10 complaints a year because people don't like the new water that they have, we're now going to get 500 complaints a year from all the new permits and the people that don't like the process.
Well, I'm still sticking with new construction.
Yeah.
So, well, but I think I think your concern is, I agree with you 100% when you start getting to the other categories. So I think for what we're calling new construction, I think easement is less of a concern because someone's basically going into that scenario. It's another thing of all of a sudden you're imposing an easement on someone because you want to put a deck on or a shed. Someone's going to grab a shotgun is what's going to happen. But a new construction, I think that's less likely to happen. And quite frankly, to this, and again, throw something at me if I'm wrong, but this conversation about maintenance and having the ability to get to things in order to repay them, we have to have easements.
Can you expand on the concept of easements, what the easement, an easement would be?
Sure.
I mean, are you talking about, an area so we can get onto the property and access it, so they have to keep it open, so then nothing could ever be built there? Is it just 5 feet on the side of the house? Is it across the back, 20 feet across the back? I'm not quite sure what an example would be.
So let's start with the definition of an easement, which is an often misused word. An easement is the granting of some of your bundle of property rights to a government or agency for a specific set of uses. What did I really say with that? Well, one thing is it's not a setback necessarily, although sometimes can act like one. It's telling people you're going to give rights to a portion of your lot to the village so that we can go into your lot to maintain a stormwater system. What we're talking about is 5 foot on the side yard, probably 10 foot on the rear yard, and 5 foot on the other side yard. So this is what would happen if we had a new subdivision. This is when it's being subdivided is not really an issue. The issue that Commissioner Burnett brought up is it's not often that you get asked to grant easements to a government during a permitting process on a single-family house. This is intended to address the areas that were subdivided prior to subdivision regulations. For new construction, I don't think staff thinks this is going to be too much of an issue.
I wouldn't expect so.
For new construction.
It's the other ones that might be
that's
an
going to
issue.
be. Good luck with that. What was everybody think of a maximum impervious coverage? Again, new construction.
To some extent, that depends on the neighborhood, because if you can promptly and efficiently convey all of the stormwater to a pipe in the street, then why is there a limit on the maximum impervious?
Right, and it might make, again, I think the configuration, the size and configuration of the lot is going to be a lot. What exists there now? At the risk of adding complexity, there could be, a maximum impervious coverage, but if at their own expense they can bring an engineering study that proves that all the water is going into a public system, if they pay the cost of proving it goes to a public system, they can get a variation off of that. But they have to prove all the water goes into the public system rather than on the neighbor. But the starting point is maximum impervious. And if you can prove your lot's configured in a way at your own expense, all the village engineering costs are paid for by the developer, maybe they can have more impervious. That just came to me in the last 5 minutes, last 90 seconds.
If every lot paved 100% of their lot and it all
still a
the
maximum,
public system,
just,
the public system can only handle so much capacity. So if that runoff causes the system to surcharge, it is going to impact negatively at properties.
What is there? Help me understand this. Are there going to be some drivers on a lot of lots that are going to limit the maximum amount of impervious area anyway, right? Once you start talking the setbacks and other permitting requirements and building codes. Mm-hmm. I mean, to your point, you're right, but you wouldn't be able to do that. You couldn't do lot-to-lot line. You wouldn't allow that in the first place.
You get pretty close, because right now the setback's only, I'm going to stop.
It's 5 foot in the R4 zoning district, which is typically the 50-foot wide lots.
Yeah, well,
so
back to my point.
You can go, up to 40 feet. You can put a patio that's 40 feet wide and 20 feet deep if you wanted to. That way, you get a front yard setback at 25 feet, but you can still have a walk in front of that. And you can still have driveway in those setbacks and like that. So you could still see a lot. back to the point of potentially not, if all the water went to the public system, you designed that public system for what was initially put in, but if somebody then bought the house and wanted to put a patio in the back, that could increase your impervious area as well. So there's a you're not going to ever get 100% because of the setbacks, but you could get a fair amount of impervious on the line.
Yeah,
I'm on fire with maximum impervious.
The public system thing is part of the issue too here, that we're, the do no harm to neighbors is certainly one of the concerns, but do no harm to the public system, because a guy, and I know we're going to arm wrestle later, but a person puts an addition on their house and manages to control the water in a way that it ends up in the public system. If they're increasing the runoff, they're increasing the burden on the system that we've designed, paid for, and have to maintain. That's another one of my concerns with this whole thing. Is I've said this before in other meetings prior to this. We put some points on the map and laid out some plans in 7, right? I think, Mayor. And then we kind of revisited those in 13. But those are static, And as we allow redevelopment, even at the smaller levels, we're moving the target that we've established, designed, and in some cases already paid for. That's a risk. And to what degree, what safety factor is there in capacity of the system? I don't know the answer to that. But there's some point where that system is no longer sufficient. The one we just designed and just bought and just paid for is no longer sufficient. And it's a risk. It's a 20, 30-year horizon risk that we take, like, in Washington Park. I'm going to pick on that, not knowing if it's right or not. Anne's going to roll her eyes back in her head. But Washington Park was a ridiculous amount of money and a ton of engineering, and has done, by all accounts, a pretty darn good job of serving its purpose. It's also fed by a portion of town that's got a lot of opportunities for infill redevelopment. A ton of them.
We actually looked at that 1,000-acre general area, and that Washington Park serves. I think Washington Park is about 9 and some acre feet of storage. Right, and there's like 11 and some acre feet of storage in that 1,000 acres. If it were developed new under subdivision codes, it would require hundreds of acre feet of storage, and that's really our poster child for the lack of infrastructure.
Yeah, and then when we look at the neighborhoods around there that sort of feed that watershed, they're ripe for substantial infill redevelopment that could be pretty heavy in terms of impervious area if we don't try and manage it.
I'm just going to throw this out. Let's not talk about it. Let's put it aside for a later conversation. Somebody brought up the concept of variations if you did this or that or whatnot. Obviously, I assume there are other opportunities, perhaps, to at least discuss about what is really impervious. Well, if you decide to put Grove Street in your driveway, or you do what the school did, the parking lot across from Downers North, I'm just using those as 2 examples. Is there some flexibility there?
Yeah, one of the impacts, if we were to do a variety of these 8 potential things, is probably a shift to more pervious paving materials. Mm-hmm. To your point, because
which may allow people to do more. They have to use certain materials that would be pervious and achieve the goal.
Maybe cheaper to do pervious pavers than it is to detain that new impervious.
And we will see that in some permits now to make their number as low as possible. So we'll see some permeable pavers or some other treatments to make that number low.
That's for later. All right, so we're coming back to 7 later. Mm-hmm. 8?
In the case of a new construction, 8's really not an issue, because if you're putting in a basin, you're going to put your BMPs in the basin, so it's not really an issue so much on the new construction.
So not a problem for new construction. 8. All right, let's go back to 5.
So 5 is the increased side yard setback. For those of you who have been around for a while, when we did the residential regs discussion in 05 through 07, this was one of the major concepts. We did not materially change the setback requirements at that time. The idea here is, especially on these 50-foot wide lots, as Sam was talking about, 5 foot is not a lot of area to get to handle the grade changes between the foundation of like a new house or an addition and the neighbors from the next door. You get some steep grades and you get quite a bit of runoff in those side yard areas. Also, within the 5-foot setback, we allow for encroachments like the escape window wells for basements that can be 18 inches or so, air conditioning units,
chimneys, that type of stuff.
Now, the trade-off on this is on the 50-foot wide lots, right now, 40 of it is buildable. And the building community will tell us that 40-foot wide first floor plan is just enough to get a first floor master typical bedroom in the modern economy. You shave that down to 38 feet, and that's right about at the number that the design of the first floor plan can be challenging. That's what they told us 10, 11 years ago. I assume it's still the case now. When we talk to builders, they'll probably tell us that. But from a stormwater management standpoint, every foot counts.
No, I get it. And that's another balance issue. Because obviously you want the setbacks for this purpose, but how much do you minimize the utilization of property by property owners? I don't know.
We can't quantify it tonight or any other night in this discussion, but, whether it's looking for the 699s or it's switching to permeable pavers, there's Downers is I'm going to overstate this, but Downers is a pretty desirable place to be for a ton of reasons. And so if all of a sudden folks have to figure out a 38-foot method of managing a master, I bet they'll do it.
And I'm fine if that's the outcome. I want to have some comfort level that's the case.
If we're only...
I want to suddenly everybody's got a 50-foot wide lot, it's viewed as a zoning downgrade.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not. If it's not, then fine. I suspect we'll hear from the
building the elevation too, right?
Elevation is an issue.
So the higher you build it, the more room you need to handle the runoff. So if you don't have it as high, then maybe you don't need the whole 5 feet. In other cases, you need it.
These things are kind of working in a system together, because if you're trying purposely in your design to try to get the water to flow towards the public system, which is in the street, there are many cases where you're going to want to build that new house up much higher than the neighbors next door, right? Because you're going to try to get the water to go forward, not off to the side. We have a lot of areas in town where the houses are lower than the street. So having more room to handle that separation with grading with the next door neighbor is important.
As is my pension, I'm going to ask a dumb question. If we're required for new construction a lot of this other stuff, and you have the practical ability to do a lot more because you're essentially regrading, you're putting in all kinds of underground stuff, you're going crazy with all these other things. For the smaller lots, the narrower lots, is the setback that 1 foot that important?
It could. The additional foot can help convey water to the front yard or to the backyard.
So, I mean, is it possible to engineer so that you achieve the same result without the setbacks? That's what I'm getting at.
And I think you could.
That's what I'm getting at. Can we still achieve the goal without shrinking the footprint? Because and obviously I'm really concerned about the 54 wide lots. If you're talking about the 60, 75, who cares?
Nan, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's when you combine, take that 5 foot and then you encroach, what, 1.5 foot with
a window well or an air conditioning unit.
You're left with 3.5 feet in some cases to...
All right. Well, I'd just be curious to know, are there ways, when you're dealing with new construction, complete scrape, you can do whatever you want to the ground, are there engineering solutions that would achieve the goal without the increased side yard setback?
Maybe we could look at setting standards for slopes or things like that.
That's just the minor question. Then maybe that would address the issue.
Isn't slopes really a big part of the deal? I mean, that's the big value in the extra foot is the extra room to manage the slope. So maybe that would be a logical way to be chasing it. Because it would be up to them to figure something out. They can do whatever they want. They can either bring the setback in to give more run, or they can. But the slope is the big issue.
Or maybe step the foundation or something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So generally speaking, yes, there are ways to engineer.
That's just my question. That's what I'm just curious. Because that might solve the problem.
If there's a larger setback for stormwater reasons and an existing house that did not comply suffered a casualty, would the concept be they could rebuild what they had before?
Yes, we just revisited this with our meeting with Mr. Persino from downtown the other day. We found out that our current code says if your house is destroyed by an act of God, you have 12 months to reestablish it where it was before.
The way it was before. So all the houses that have 5-foot setbacks would not become non-conforming, meaning that there's a casualty, you couldn't rebuild it.
They'd be non-conforming, but there would be an allowance for an act of God casualty.
To come back to the way they were. You couldn't enlarge it, but you can make the way it was. Okay.
Okay. Oh, that was a lot of work.
So this is a lot to take in one evening, and we're getting a really good head start on this. So, Mayor, obviously we're going to have to continue this conversation. If there's anything else that anybody would like to express at this point, we'd be happy to hear that.
Sure. And obviously we focused on, I appreciate that suggestion, we focused on new construction, what we're characterizing as new construction, and I think got some good direction.
Agreed.
Well, this is the easy part, which I think was smart. Let's start with the easy stuff and then see if they get more difficult as we go further. And there were a bunch of questions on the table. So I'm not going to cut the council off, but I do want to give an opportunity for any public comment on what we discussed so far. Understanding we're not making any final decisions tonight, and this obviously conversation has to continue. But any thoughts or comments?
So who do you want to go first? That's my question. So I'm sure there's been some amount of discussion with Elmhurst in particular. It seems like there's just a use case sitting there where they have probably grappled with a lot of these questions, and I don't know if their case is exactly the same as ours. It just kind of feels that way because of the stories that everybody tells around here. It just seems like similar stories. So I would love to hear more about what Elmhurst was dealing with, how similar or different it is to the situation in Downers, and how they've kind of where they settled on a lot of these issues. In addition to, however far along they are in this process right now, what they're running into in terms of, neighbor complaints, developer complaints. We heard the one statement that new development is still not having any issues at all. There's still plenty of new development in Elmhurst, and I think, we believe that new development will continue kind of going gangbusters in Downers because of how desirable it is, understanding that it's an important variable to take into account with all these discussions. So I'd love to see more information about how Elmhurst has been trying to deal with the same problem.
If I could, Mayor, give you the Cliff Note answer. We're in a very fortuitous situation there because one of our former employees, our previous Assistant Director of Public Works, now works for a private engineering company. His day job now is to review all those permits in Elmhurst. So we've been spending a lot of time with Mr. Sikich to understand how it really works because he's actually experienced it from both sides, Downers Grove and Elmhurst. The short version is Elmhurst is in a lot of ways very similar to Downers Grove, but they're very different in one important way, and that is they have an extensive public system which connects to a former quarry. So they don't have as many of the lack of integration, lack of stormwater infrastructure that we do. But basically what he said to us is this boy is much easier to do in Elmhurst than it was in Downers. That was his exact phrase. It's much easier to do in Elmhurst than it is in Downers.
We need to dig a quarry.
And put all the pipes in.
We've got a little bit of quarry in our yard right now.
We need our own deep towel.
Which is actually, that's the only point that I wanted to make is, we're spending a lot of time talking about the negative impact this could have on people who are going to be building or people who are going to be doing additions. I really think what needs to be kept at the front of the conversation at all times is the negative impact that it's having on the people who have lived here, have paid taxes faithfully, and who are being on a daily basis negatively impacted by the additions and the new construction happening around them. To your point about the storage container being in somebody's yard and what it looks like, I'd like you to meet my neighbors whose backyard backs right up next to my home. who basically no longer have a backyard a good chunk of the year because it serves as our neighborhood swamp. I know they're not the only people in Downers. I do understand they're at the extreme end of the situation, but I think it's happening more often than probably, at least I realized. So, so I ask you to please keep that at the front of the conversation at all times.
Sure. I think for new construction, that's clearly, new construction of hard additions, I don't think you're hearing any disagreement here.
No, you're absolutely
I
right.
think the bigger concern was just the flip side, and again, we're speaking to 50,000 people here in town, not just who's in this room, but also people who've lived here a long time and have paid taxes and have certain expectations of what they can do with their property, that suddenly be told they have to spend $50,000 on storage, they're going to riot.
Yeah, we had the conversation earlier today about the difference between new construction and new stuff, and our main concern was exactly what you had brought up, was about the shenanigans. I'm going to leave up one wall and two pillars, and it's not new construction anymore. So that's our primary concern. That this deals with either new construction, which is total tear down and put a new thing up or a new lot, or something that is dramatically different. However that's defined from what's already there, especially from an NNI perspective. Some other things that would really help people like me anyway. I love the metrics. I love hearing about these things because I don't have a whole lot of context for how many 50-foot wide lots there are in Downers Grove. So when we talk about the effect of the side yard setback and what that will have on the village, is that 80% of the houses, 40% of the houses, 30%, which,
Yeah, unfortunately,
zoning map,
Zoning maps. Unfortunately, I'm going to say that they're probably where we don't have the infrastructure, that's the problem.
Yeah, that is exactly the issue.
So, information like that is very helpful. You were talking about the extension of the public system if necessary, and how many lots are out there that are more than 200, how many parcels are more than 200 feet, from the existing system. That's not something that's kind of readily known by folks.
We're actually calculating, that was one of the council questions that we're still working on using our GIS system, so we'll get those out there.
So I think that'll be very helpful, just contextually for the conversation.
I will comment that the GIS is available to the public. It's amazing. Both the village GIS and the county GIS. You can learn all kinds of
Parcel Navigator, you can spend hours on.
I have spent hours for first class and projects, right.
What happens with those systems is that they're really, really great for targeted searching and targeted information. And they're horrendous if you want an executive search of what's going on in an area. It's just not built for that because they're not built for policy discussions.
That's why we have Karen Robbins on our team, who is the master at this, so she's going to get us this stuff. So
that's why we're here to hear it. And I should have opened by saying we very much appreciate the opportunity to sit in and listen and hear all this stuff and see kind of the extreme other end of the options that we were pushing for, in our previous discussions. So thank you for that. The last thing I had written down in my notes is, Mayor Toller, you had talked about do no more harm, and kind of the flip side of the coin as far as what you could do with things that with things that folks aren't thinking about in terms of development and things like that. I think listing out what those harms might be, aside from the stormwater impacts and things like that. I think you rattled off a few, faster than I could actually write down.
That was by design.
I run the data governance office for training. I know how to run those discussions sometimes. So I get it, but more of that will help.
Yes, and quite frankly, one of the reasons why I'm doing that is because in order to achieve progress, we really need to bring the community along. And what I don't want to do is for a segment of the community to all of a sudden view this as, oh my goodness gracious, what are you knuckleheads doing? And suddenly we get pushback and we don't gain any traction in actually achieving some better results.
So we're committed to helping provide at least a real-time feedback
Right.
on any ideas you guys.
Because there's a lot of people out there that maybe not be paying attention, and all of a sudden they catch wind of some newspaper article that says it's going to cost $50,000 to put in a deck, and suddenly we've got a council chambers full of people who are trying to stop anything from getting done because of misinformation, and we don't want that either. We want this to be something that sounds very reasonable, well thought out, balanced, and bring the community along with us. And then we can actually achieve something that is beneficial to everybody.
And really thank all of you, like, this is a late night, I know you guys all have jobs and families, and we're super grateful for this conversation and the fact that you all have so many perspectives and so much information to bring to it, so thank you.
Well, thank you for continuing to participate. Clearly, we're not done. Any other thoughts or comments from the council at this point? Thank you.
What the next steps are.
Great question, Dave. First of all, I was going to thank you for I was going to thank you for the just the way this was all packaged and presented. I thought was extremely helpful. Understanding there's a lot to take in, and there are a lot of gray areas here that we're going to have to wrestle with. But great start. So with that, what are our next steps?
I think we'll go to work to synthesize what we heard tonight and how it might put more of a fine-tuning of what's actually still on the table going forward. We'll probably have to pick this up after the holidays because we only have 2 council meetings left this year, so we'll probably reconvene sometime in January. And during that time, we'll try to figure out what are the best next steps to further the policy conversation and bring the community with us.
Right. And is there, I'll just throw this question out, is there a way so that we're not suffering from perfect being the enemy of good? Are there ways that we can, let's say we all reach some agreement on pieces, as you pointed out. Can those be implemented sooner, and then some of these tougher issues we can get to later?
Yes. There are some pieces of this that could be implemented one piece at a time. We just have to analyze to make sure we're not accidentally affecting other parts of the system. But yeah, I think we'll take the ones that are the most effective, the ones the council agree on, and we can move incrementally.
New construction.
Right, new construction. Let's say, for example, we all agreed on 8 things for new construction, and we defined what new construction was. Could we go ahead and do that, and then start to wrestle with these other things, which I think require a little bit more?
If you have an above-ground swimming pool.
Yeah,
yes, well, I mean, that's where we're really going to bring the community along. I don't think most people are going to ride over new construction, but some of this other stuff, you could get misimpressions, and perception is reality, and that's what I want to be careful of.
We'll probably start by packaging up some regulations for new single.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much. I have a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor? Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you.